What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is a story where Isay was the first Nephilim in the universe. Isay is the forbidden race. And Nephilim, hybrids of angels and devils. Thought to be impossible for their massive amounts of power. Born the first, former Archangel of Light, Lucifer Morningstar, and an female angel, he is forced into hiding with a new guardian for over 300 years. Blending into society for all those years, but one day he has had enough and decides no more hiding. But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more informations. Now, let's get into part 1. But the three factions of the supernatural world, they have always been at odds and never really agreed on anything. They didn't get along very well. No, that is an understatement. The Great War between the factions costed thousands of lives of all of them. They were never the same afterwards. The angels and devils never ever saw eye to eye. Unless it was very important matter. There was one matter long ago before the Great War when the two of them did see eye to eye on a very big issue that involved both of them. The breeding of the two factions that produced an offspring of the two of them, or called the Nephilim. The very delicate subject to both of them. To the devils it was completely disgusting in their minds that someone would want to have a child with an angel. Well, the angels thought it was unfathomable that one of them would willingly fall to have a child, but somehow like a miracle the angel didn't fall, and that made them uneasy on what the child would be. They didn't know what caused the mother to not fall and why in the first place she did it. However, emotions have the power to influence actions. Pure love is what brought them to this problem, there wasn't any lust in it at all. Lucifer was the male and angel by the name of Maria who he fell in love with. Even if they knew the risks, they knew they would fight it. They were able to hide it for only so long, they knew would get caught, but they didn't care. Not one bit. The child was due soon once word got out. Lucifer's popularity went down quite a bit among the population of the devils. The angels wanted to wait until the child was born and exile him. The mother didn't like that very much. It wasn't until the boy was finally born that they decided what they were going to do. The child was going to be exiled. The mother was going to be condemned for the sins she committed. Lucifer was left to grief over his loved one's death. He never saw his child again. That was over 300 years ago. The boy was given to one of Lucifer's most trusted friends who had watched over him. His name was Kai Haidu. Isay Haidu was the child's new name. His real name was Isay Lucifer, son of Lucifer the Morningstar. He knew what had happened to his parents and he didn't like it very much. Scene break. Kuo. Isay found himself in his bedroom getting ready for his first day at Kuo Academy. Even if he was over 300 years old, he learned magic that could change his form to look like he was 17 years old. He was going to be a second year. He had two friends, Mitsuda and Motohama. He just stuck with them to blend in. They were perverts, but he didn't stop to their levels. They were going to be in the same class, so he knew he would find himself in trouble eventually. He got a bag packed for the day and headed downstairs. When Kai saw him, he smiled and placed a plate of breakfast on the counter. "Hey Ice, good luck today," he said. Isay nodded and started to eat. "So what are you planning to do today at the academy? We know there are devils there," Kai said seriously. Isay was quiet for some time before replying. "I'm gonna try to keep them in the dark for as long as I can. I'll cross that bridge when the time comes," he replied. I looked serious for a moment and spoke up. "Isay, you must know if they knew that you're the child of Lucifer and Maria, the world will never be the same. They wouldn't know what to do," Kai said. Isay nodded and finished his food, then got up. "Okay, I'm leaving now." He waved bye and left. I watched him leave and knew this was going to be the start of something. Kuo always had the presence of devils. They were only going to be able to hide for so long before someone found out. Isay needed to be ready when the truth would be revealed. He arrived at the gates of the academy, so after it. As he looked around the academy, it was obvious the ratio of boys to girl was small. He cringed as he saw the kendo girls with their bakens. He knew Mitsuda and Motohama would be peeking on them. He sighed and chuckled while walking inside. He needed to get his schedule, which meant going to the student council room. As he arrived at the door, he instantly knew they were one of the peerages that were in the academy. Stealing his nerves, he knocked. He heard a voice telling him to come in. As he walked in, he noticed some of the people in there were staring at him. He sighed and silently cursed. He was already on their radar. "How can I help you?" a black-haired girl with rimmed glasses asked. Isay identified her as the king of the peerage. She had the most power that he could sense. "I'm the new student, Isay Haidu. I'm here to get my schedule," he replied. She looked at him for a minute. It was like she was evaluating him. "Sure, take a seat and I'll have my secretary bring it out," she said. Isay nodded and took a seat. He knew they were all staring at him. He ignored it and waited for his schedule to arrive. Once he got it, he left the office. He felt the stares as he walked out as well. He sighed as he walked down the hallways of the academy. He arrived at the classroom to see he was with Mitsuda and Motohama. They were happy to see him. Issei. Ready to join us in some glorious babe action? Motohama shouted aloud. Issei groaned as he got glares from the rest of the classroom. I told you before, I'm not a pervert like you guys. You may be my friends, but I will not stoop to your level. He replied dryly. The classroom wasn't expecting that. Haidu was always thought to be a pervert since he hung out with those two, but now they were seeing a different side of him. Soon the teacher was in the classroom and the day started for them. Scene break lunchtime. An old school building sat a group of people. One of them was the student council president. She was visiting her friend to discuss the new student. They were currently playing a game of chess. So what did you find out, Sona? A red-haired girl asked. Sona pulled out a file and slid it across the table. Not that much really. Only a name, a birthday, his address and his guardian's names. She replied. The red-haired girl hummed to herself as she read over his file. So what are you planning, Riaz? Sona asked suspicious. Riaz looked at her friend and replied dryly. There is something about him that intrigues me. We know the fallen angels have targeted him. If they plan to kill him we will give him a flyer. She replied. Sona looked taken aback at her friend's attempt to get a piece on her side. If it was her she would have approached him directly. Why not approach him directly instead of letting him die? Sona asked. Sona, it would scare him too much if I asked him directly. Riaz said. Sona shook her head and decided it was time to go. That's checkmate. She said. Riaz looked at her friend. I'll leave you now. Sona said. As she left, Riaz looked out the window at Issei who was sitting under a tree. She wondered what it was that made her interested in him. She turned to her queen and spoke up. I can tell Kaneko to continue watching him for now until we know more. She said. Yes, Riaz. She replied. However, before Akeno could leave the room, she caught a glimpse of something that intrigued her. It seemed there was some commotion down by where Issei was. Riaz turned to see it as well. The both of them watched at what went on. It seemed the Kendo girls were chasing Mitsuda and Motohama and they ran up to Issei to try to use him as a meat shield. He was half asleep already and was startled when he was dragged up off the ground. Wah? He mumbled while rubbing his eyes. He was met with glares from the Kendo team. He noticed Kadis and Murayama in the group. He turned around to see Mitsuda and Motohama cowering behind him. What did you two do? He asked them. The girls answered for them. They were peeking on us. Murayama shouted aloud. Issei rubbed his temples as he felt a headache coming on. I knew this would happen. He muttered. They all raised an eyebrow at his new behavior they were starting to witness. It was only to get worse. They would see a side of him he didn't want them to know about. Save us, Issei. They pleaded. Before Issei could speak up, the girls did. So you're defending them, huh? Kadis said while glaring at him. Issei just raised an eyebrow at her accusation. He shook his head. Before he could defend himself they acted. I, pervert. Kadis screeched. She then swung her kendo stick. Issei's eyes widened and his battle instincts kicked in. The stick never hit its target. Issei caught it with one hand easily. The crowd was silent. One boy caught the kendo stick of one of the best in the club. They clearly weren't expecting this. Issei sighed as he realized he made a situation. The devils were watching him too. So there was no way he could back out and say it was an accident. It was time to come up with an excuse. How did you do that? Murayama asked with her eyes narrowed. Issei, why didn't you tell us you got some sweet moves? Both of the boys behind him shouted. He glared at them. He was furious on the inside they got him into this situation. If you two bothered to do anything else besides peeking and talking about porn, maybe you would have known that I've trained in martial arts a bit. He spat at them. Everyone's eyes widened. Now they were definitely sure the Fasadi war was coming off and his true colors were showing. Riaz and Akeno were watching intently. They were surprised when he caught it. The Kendo club were excellent sword users in their opinion. Even Kiba her knight thought they could have potential to be great knights. They watched as the conversation continued down there. Martial arts, you say? Kadis whispered with an eerie grin. Issei didn't like where this was going. She motioned for the other girls to step up and they all charged at him. He was dodging left and right. No one could get a hit on him. Kadis came over and tried a horizontal slash. She was sure it would hit him, but he quickly squatted and avoided the hit. Everyone was awestruck at how he was making the Kendo team look like fools. Mitsuda and Motohama's jaws were dropped at seeing him. Soon the Kendo girls were on their knees panting from exhaustion, while Issei didn't even break a sweat. Well, since you couldn't get me, here's your prize. He said. Everyone was confused at this and raised an eyebrow. He tossed Mitsuda and Motohama in front of him and walked away. He chuckled as he heard the kendo stick smack against them and their screams. The rest of the day wasn't too bad. His little show's rumor was spread like a wildfire, and everyone knew. He sighed as the final bell rang and it was time to go. He got stares as he walked out of the building. Once he was out he started walking home. About 15 minutes into his walk home, he felt a presence. He knew they were watching him. He came to a bridge and slowed down as he felt another presence come closer to him. It was a fallen angel. He turned to continue walking, but stopped when someone called out for him. Wait. It was obviously a girl. He sighed and turned around. Yes. He replied. She seemed to be flustered. Obviously faking it. He thought. Irise hide you right? She asked. His eyes narrowed for a second. Yes. Why? He replied. She was quiet for a bit. Would you like to go on a date with me? She asked. Irise knew now there was no way out of the situation. She most likely was ordered to kill him. Did she know who he was? Or did they think he was just some normal person with a sacred gear that might awaken? Either way she was going to try. Sure, why not? What's your name? He asked. Yuma Amano. She replied. They went their separate ways, and Irise decided to get some sleep and wait for Sunday and see what it brought for him. Scene break Sunday. The day was the date. He knew it would be good at first, but at the end it would change. He prepared for that, and if it was needed he would reveal himself. He was currently waiting at a restaurant for her to show up. Eventually she did and they went to eat. They both sat down at a table and ordered their food. Yuma decided to get a salad while Irise got some pasta. Soon they started to talk about their likes and hobbies and similar interests. Irise knew she had an ulterior motive for today. He knew it would end badly. Not for him though. If she tried something, he wouldn't hesitate to retaliate and show her his true self. Yuma was thinking to herself as he ate. I don't know if it is a sacred gear or not, I can't tell with his aura. It seems demonic in nature, but there's something with it, but I can't figure out what it is. She thought with a light hum. The truth was he learned to mask his aura so that he could avoid any unwanted attention that would reveal who he really was. She knew she was going to have to kill him at the end of the date. She had it all planned out. What she didn't know is he didn't have a sacred gear. He was something much more deadly than a sacred gear. Something ancient and thought to be impossible. If she knew what he really was, she would have hightailed it already out of pure fear. Before they knew it they had already left and were walking alone in a park. Suddenly Yuma stopped in front of a fountain and turned around to Irise. He knew this is where it was going to happen. Irise-kun? She asked sweetly. Irise blinked and replied in an innocent tone. Yes. She had a grin on her face. It was deceiving. He could tell that right off the bat. I want to commemorate this day. She started. Irise blinked and feigned ignorance while telling her to continue. She had a smirk on her face as she heard him. Would you die for me? She asked in a dark voice. Irise's eyes narrowed. It was time. But that thought in his head. He saw her form a light spear and go to stab him. Her eyes were wide as she saw the light spear blocked by a red and black sword that had black lightning crackling off of it. She looked to his face and saw something that made her skin crawl. With one hell of a eerie grin he spoke one sentence that set her fate in stone. So now you show your true colors. He chuckled darkly. Yuma didn't know what was going on. At first she had moved to stab the boy with her light spear, but it was suddenly blocked by a black and red sword that had black lightning. Then she heard his voice with the grin he showed her. It was extremely unnerving. She felt the dread as she finally realized the meaning of his words. He knew what she was, but she didn't know who he was or what he really was. Who are you? She asked through gritted teeth. He chuckled darkly and then narrowed his eyes. I think I should be the one asking you that, Yuma-dadi replied in a mocking tone. She was starting to get irritated at him, summoned another light spear that had more pressure, put it in and hurled it at him. Ah, you bastard. With that 3 words uttered she chucked it. When it came towards him it caused an explosion. She started laughing thinking she had gotten him. Oh boy, how wrong she was. When the dust cleared she was terrified at the sight before her. The explosion only ripped his shirt into shreds and revealed what was underneath. The body that was carved out of blood, sweat, pain and tears, but that wasn't what scared her. No, it was his expression that was etched on his face. It was a hardened glare sent right at her. She swore she saw his hair start to shift between red and blue, like choices being debated. When she looked into his eyes she saw something that made her terrified even more than the glare she was receiving. It was like a demon, trying to claw its way out, wanting to be free instead of being caged and held back. It was a true demon and he possessed it. She shivered at what it would be like if he were to set his true self free without restraint. What are you? She asked weakly. He started chuckling darkly. I am your worst nightmare, bitch. He shouted. She fell on her knees as his aura exploded with a blood-red hue to it. Irise noticed something as he was letting out his power. Our little devil has run away like a scared kitten. He laughed humorously. He narrowed his eyes on Yuma. What's your real name? He asked seriously. R.R. Raynor. She stuttered weakly. He had a smug smile on. She looked up frantically as he screamed, letting out a massive amount of power. Every supernatural was going to know about it, and they would be here in a minute to investigate. She looked to him to see him bathed in a red glow, but his body was starting to flicker between a human and something she couldn't make out. Well, Raynor, I thank you for the date. Now beggin'. He said loudly with a grin. But that sentence he charged, kicking up debris along his path as he neared her and hit her with a powerful punch that sent her flying into a tree. He looked at her trying to get up. Looking at her caused something stir in his stomach. Was it guilt? No, it was pity. As Raynor looked to him, she saw the red start to fade as it was replaced with a blue. He wasn't moving at all. She wondered what was going on with him. First he was thrashing her around like she was a toy, and now he was silent and not moving. Something was definitely different with this boy. As soon as the blue appeared it vanished and he was back to normal. Raynor had enough. She watched as he silently cursed and started to walk away. Are you running away? She shouted angrily. He didn't even turn around. Not running away, just avoiding a gigantic shitstorm that will engulf the supernatural world if I stay any longer. You're lucky that time ran out or you would be 6 feet under by now. He shouted back. That left her confused. What shitstorm would happen if he were to stay? That's when she felt it. The traces of magical energy that were coming to her location. There was several of them. She quickly turned and hightailed it out of the area and went back to the church. As soon as she left, 4 magic circles appeared in the area. Out popped several different figures. These were the respective leaders of the 3 factions. Devils, angels and fallen angels. One girl with twin tails was looking at a man with crimson red hair. It looked like they were having a silent conversation. What was that enormous power spike and who caused it? A man asked aloud. He had brown hair with golden bangs and a goatee. No one had an answer to that question. They looked around to see if there was any traces of the person or if there was any possible witnesses or bystanders. However, the area was completely desolate. Whoever had this obviously had a motive, the girl said. They all agreed on what she said. The red-haired man decided to speak up. Yes, Serafal, he had a motive, but there is something else behind what happened, he said. Everyone raised an eyebrow at his statement. What do you mean, Surziches? She asked. Everyone wanted to know what he meant as well. Whoever did this had some kind of training to help with whatever power they have. It's obvious since there is no major damages, except for the debris that is in a straight path, most likely a charge type attack, or they threw someone on the ground and they skidded backwards. He mused. Their eyes widened. If what he said was true, that meant their potential could be off the charts, and it would be very dangerous to have them as an enemy. What they didn't know is Issei didn't like politics very much and would only get involved if it was absolutely necessary or he got something out of it. Otherwise he would stay out of everyone's affairs and mind his own business. However, that was all about to change. The 2 people who were silent decided to speak up. Surziches, your sister had territory rights over Kuo, right? The male asked. Surziches turned to the man and replied. Yes, she does, Michael. He replied. That man was Michael, the leader of heaven, and beside him was Gabriel, one of the great seraphs. She looked to the leader of the fallen angels to see him strangely silent. Azazel, what aren't you telling us? She asked seriously. Everyone looked to the leader, who looked like a deer caught in a headlights. He sighed, then decided to speak up. I have a group of fallen here. One of the members were ordered to watch over a potential sacred gear user. However, I think the group has started to defect and they might have tried to kill the user, which might have unlocked the sacred gear in a life or death situation. He confessed. They all widened their eyes. What was the user's name? Serafal asked. Azazel sighed and spoke up again. Issei Haidu, he said. No one noticed it, but the 2 angels' faces were white as a sheet. They obviously knew that name. Gabriel looked happy while Michael looked somber. Are you sure that was his name? She asked in a panic. Everyone turned to the angels and instantly knew something was up. What is the matter? Azazel asked, confused. Gabriel sighed and spoke up. They both knew that they couldn't say too much about the boy, or it would be extremely bad if the supernatural world knew of his existence. The boy's story is very complicated. It is something that was left unspoken for certain reasons, she said. Everyone's eyebrow raised at her statement. They were obviously confused. What do you mean? Serafal asked. Gabriel sighed once again and looked to Michael for him to continue. The boy is very powerful, yes, however he holds animosity for our factions, specifically the devils and angels, Michael said. Surziches was getting annoyed at how vague they were being. What are you guys hiding? He asked seriously. Michael sighed and turned to the red-headed devil. We cannot say too much about the boy. We fear if we do, his animosity will only grow towards us, he said. Azazel was intrigued as well. It wasn't every day when the Seraphs acted this way. It was like they regretted something. What is he? He asked. Gabriel glared at Azazel. It was obvious that was the one question they wouldn't answer. That doesn't matter, just know he is more powerful than any one of you can ever imagine, even you Surziches are nothing but a pebble compared to his real power. Now that we know it was him, Kuo is lucky it didn't get leveled. That Fallen was insanely stupid to anger the boy. Gabriel snapped, it was obvious there was something else behind her words. She felt something for the boy. Surziches couldn't believe his ears, neither could Seraphol or Azazel. They all wondered what power he held and what happened to him to make him like he was, whatever it was they knew it had to be bad. Surziches had a revelation, he knew his sister was looking into a new recruit at her school that recently turned co-ed, and he knew Issei Haidu was one of the new students. His mom Venelana was in charge of it so he knew what students were there. That boy Issei Haidu, he goes to Kuo Academy. My sister and Seraphol's sister's peerages are there. Are they in any danger with him there? He asked seriously. Seraphol's eyes widened, she turned to the angels wanting an answer. As long as they don't provoke him. Gabriel replied. They sighed now that they knew they were somewhat safe from the boy's immense power, as long as they didn't do something foolishly to provoke him. They could only shudder as they imagined what he would be like if he was filled with rage. If he had that much power and was enraged, it would be a slaughterhouse. But that said, Michael turned to Gabriel and she nodded. It was time to return to heaven, there was nothing they could do. They didn't know where Issei was right now or they would go talk to him. They hoped he would get over his hatred soon, they knew his power would be hard to battle if he was an enemy. What do we do about the boy? Seraphol asked. Gabriel sighed and spoke up again. Best bet is to leave him be, that's the way it's always been. She said vaguely. Seraphol wondered what was going on with the angels, she knew there was something serious about it. It was a secret they held and wouldn't give it up easily. It only made her more interested in the boy, and she vowed to find out whatever it was they were hiding. One part of her mind was contemplating if she wanted to find it out, if the angels were hiding it, then it was a very big secret and would most likely change the supernatural world forever. Little did they know the world was going to change, more so than they could ever imagine. Scene break with Issei. Issei was cursing himself all the way back to his house. He knew he might have just jeopardized his peace and quiet in his life. Those magic energies he felt coming were definitely powerful and would only be the leaders, and he felt several of them, so he knew everyone felt his power rise. He was able to hold back his demonic form so it didn't show, but he did let out a lot of demonic power. So he knew his time of peace was closing fast and the clock was counting down faster. He needed to think and plan out his next move. Soon before he knew it he had already arrived at his house. When Kai saw his expression he knew something was wrong. Seriously wrong. Ice. What happened? He asked seriously. Issei looked over to him and sat across from him. My date today tried to kill me. He said. Ai's eyes widened, that was all he needed to hear. So you retaliated and most likely let the supernatural world know of your presence? He asked. Issei nodded slowly. Kai sighed and decided to speak again. What exactly happened? Tell me so I can figure out what you can expect. He said. Issei nodded, Kai was his mentor, so he was always the one who was smarter. He taught Issei all he knew. So Issei told him where the fight had taken place, how he let out his demonic energy, but didn't show his forms. Kai was listening silently the whole time. Once he learned that Issei felt several amounts of magical energy and left the area quickly, he knew it was true. The supernatural world would never be the same when Issei's real identity would come to light, it was only a matter of time before it did. Well Issei, I think it was only a matter of time before the truth comes out. When it does come out, be prepared is all I can say. The backlash effect would be enormous. Kai said. Issei nodded and walked upstairs, he wanted to go to bed early and just fall on the bed and go to sleep. That's exactly what he did. Soon the morning came and he was already up and walking downstairs to get ready for one hell of a day at school. He knew the devils were going to want to talk to him, however they didn't know he didn't want to talk to them at all. As he walked downstairs he saw Kai making breakfast, like usual he grabbed a plate and sat down. So what are you planning on doing today? You know they will confront you about it. Kai spoke up. Issei looked at Kai and sighed. I don't care what they try, I'm not going to even talk to them. If they want to know so badly about me then they will have to force it out of me. That is if they can. Issei replied dryly. Kai sighed to himself as he heard Issei, he knew that Issei's temper was something to not be messed with. After all his animosity towards the other supernaturals proved that fact, but Kai knew that times were changing and he would have to let go of his hate in order for peace to be truly gained, or else they would never get along and history would eventually repeat itself. As Kai watched Issei walk out of the door for the day, he hoped he wouldn't be too harsh on the devils. Before he knew it, Issei had already arrived at the academy. Once he walked into his classroom, everyone knew that something was wrong and to not bother him. It was blatantly obvious to anyone who was in the room. Issei wondered when they would come. He knew today was going to be the day they approached him. It was already lunchtime before he knew it and no sign of anyone. He knew then that they were most likely going to come at the end of the day. It was the final class of the day and they had just finished, and that's when the bell rang. Before anyone could get up to leave, the door opened revealing Kiba, the prince of Kuo Academy. Issei groaned as all the girls started fawning over him. Once Kiba started towards his desk, Issei knew this was who they sent to get him. However, they didn't know he didn't want to go with him. He knew, however, that they wouldn't stop until he did come, but that wasn't going to stop him. He wasn't going to give it to them easily. "Issei Haidu?" Kiba asked. Issei just tilted his head and gave a blank look. "Yes, now what do you want?" he replied dryly. Kiba just raised his eyebrow at his response. "Our club president would like to speak with you," he said. Issei just stood up and grabbed his backpack and walked towards the door. Kiba followed him thinking he was going to the orc room. However, when Issei stopped in the middle of the classroom and turned his head towards him, he didn't know what to think. "Sorry pretty boy, but I'd rather not waste my time speaking with the princess of the school," he said aloud. Everyone was shocked. The girls were furious at what he said. Kiba looked angry as well for insulting her, but he knew this was a very particular situation. They didn't know enough about him to make a decisive decision. Before Kiba could speak up again, Issei was gone, leaving a shocked classroom in his wake. In an old abandoned room, there was a group of devils discussing a very interesting individual. It was none other than Issei Haidu. He was an unknown. No, that's a very big understatement. He was an enigma. They had no idea what to think about him. All they knew is that there was some kind of power embedded within himself, and judging by how Kaneko reacted, it was very powerful. The day Kaneko came back, she was shell-shocked, sputtering words about demons. The king of the peerage, Riaz, was very interested in what kind of power could scare her rook. What she didn't know is that she didn't want to find out. "So what happened?" a retarded girl asked. She turned to Kaneko and waited for her response. They were on their date and at the time they arrived at the park late at night, the Fallen tried to kill Issei Haidu, but he blocked her strike instantly. He then started to overpower her with a monstrous aura. I felt it and fled. The presence itself was dark. I could feel the hatred and pure rage leaking out, Kaneko said. There were two others in the room currently. They didn't know what to think either. They knew if it scared her, then it was something very serious. They all looked to their king as she decided what to do. The Keno, Kiba, keep an eye on him at school. Kaneko stayed behind a bit, she said aloud. They all nodded quickly and began doing their duties for the day. School started in a few hours, and they planned to bring him to the clubroom today. Riaz knew he couldn't refuse with more than 2 people. What she didn't know is it would piss him off. Very badly. She wasn't going to like his reaction that much. She watched as her peerage left the clubroom to begin the day. On the other side of Kuo, a boy named Issei Haidu was getting KN ready. Sluggishly he strode out of the bathroom, it seemed he just woken up. It was 15 minutes later and the front door was opened and out he walked. He knew this day was going to be a real bitch. He knew he couldn't avoid the inevitable. Riaz was going to ask him again, and he knew this time was going to be the one he would have to go. He was already on everyone's radar. He knew it was only a matter of time before his secret was out. However, he was going to do everything in his power to keep it from coming out. But that in his mind, he continued walking towards the academy. He knew today was going to be interesting. It was about 15 minutes later and he stood in front of the gate to the academy. Sighing to himself, he opened it up and walked forwards. He instantly knew he was being watched, but he ignored it and continued forwards. He would deal with them later. Soon he was sitting in his classroom. He was trying to not make an outburst. However, 2 people were starting to get on his nerves. Really badly. Their names were Mitsuda and Motohama. He silently cursed as he listened. "Why, Issei? Why did you leave us to the arms of the Kendo Club?" Mitsuda screeched. Issei's eyes twitched slightly. He was starting to get annoyed really badly. "Issei, why did you abandon us?" Motohama shouted. Issei was fed up, he had enough. He stood up from his desk and turned around and glared at the 2 of them. The classroom was suddenly silent. They were watching with intent. They wondered what Issei was about to say. "Maybe if you 2 bothered to do something other than peeking to fulfill your own perverted goals, you would know I want nothing to do with that. I abandoned you because I hardly think of you as friends. No more than acquaintances." He spoke aloud. Everyone was shocked. Issei Haidu had just broken off a friendship that was supposedly not even there. They wondered what was going through his head at the moment. The teacher was silent at the whole interaction. He could tell that something was bothering Issei all day, and with what those 2 just said, he needed to get something off his chest to relieve some stress that was building up for the past few days. Motohama and Mitsuda didn't even say anything. They knew it was final. Before anyone knew it, class had started and no more interruptions had come. When Issei heard the bell ring, he knew it was coming closer. It was only a few more classes until lunch came. He knew that was when they would strike. He knew they would most likely bring 2 or 3 people to get him. Increasing their numbers and coming to get him at a time like that left him without any reasonable options. He knew it wouldn't be good if he rejected more than 2 people who had large reputations in the school. He knew he was going to have to submit and go with them. Before he knew it, it was already lunchtime. He didn't want to eat in the cafeteria. So he walked outside and sat under a tree. He finished his food pretty quickly, and since he didn't see anyone approaching, he took the rest of the time to take a little nap. However, not 5 minutes later, he felt 3 different energies approaching him. He groaned as he realized they were here. It was time, there was no avoiding it now. He opened his eyes to see 2 girls and 1 boy standing in front of him. One he recognized instantly. The one in the middle was Akeno Himejima. He knew who she was, the second queen of Kuo Academy, next to Ria's Gremory. Next to her was Kiba Udo, the prince himself. He snorted as he remembered he tried to get him to come the last time. The other one, he knew as well. She was the one who was watching his date. He chuckled on the inside as he remembered fleeing as he started to release his demon form. It was sad, he didn't get to fully transform. The approaching energies made sure of that after he fled the area of the date. He wasn't too happy either. "Issei Haidu," Akeno said. Issei looked right at her, he grinned as she flinched from his glare. "What?" He spat. She didn't expect his tone, she knew there was some hatred in him. She knew from what she heard from Kaneko that she should have expected it, however she didn't think he would be like that right off the bat. She wondered what made him like that. She quickly shook of her thoughts and continued. "My club president would like to speak with you," she said. Issei groaned, he reluctantly stood up, he started to follow them as they started to walk back to the clubhouse. He knew what this meeting was going to entail, and they wouldn't like his answers very much. He didn't care though, not one bit. He was going to be very blunt and say what he felt. He didn't care what they thought about it, he knew the main reason this meeting was being called was most likely to try to recruit him in a peerage. He snorted at that thought. Firstly, he was too powerful to even be in one, secondly he didn't like being a slave. Once they walked in the old school building, Issei took a look around. It was old, no doubt. They walked up to a pair of wooden doors. Issei knew this was where the meeting would take place. Akeno opened the doors, and Issei finally got a look inside it. Victorian furniture was heavily present. He spotted Ria sitting on the desk waiting, obviously for him. "I've brought him Butchu," Akeno said while walking up. Issei saw Ria's nod and turned to him. "Haidu-san, would you mind taking a seat?" she asked. Issei rolled his eyes and took a seat in one of the chairs. "So what can I do for you?" he asked sarcastically. He watched as the other 3 took their places, he snorted at seeing where they were. It was obvious to him that this was all planned out. Kiba was leaning on a window sill, he was obviously the knight and judging by the distance, he'd be able to get a strike in. If the opponent wasn't Issei. Kaneko was to his right, close-range combat. He knew they were placed in relevance to their pieces. Akeno was closer to Ria's than Kiba, she was the queen of the peerage after all. He could deduce what the others were as well. He didn't really feel any magical energies off Kiba, so that made him most likely a knight. Kaneko on the other hand, he knew instantly what she was and also what Akeno was. You could say he had keen senses. Ria suddenly started to speak up. "Issei Haidu, I'm sure you know the reason you're here. So I'll be blunt about it. What are you and why are you in my territory?" she asked with an edge in her tone. Issei quickly chuckled. He was amused at the princess's attempt. Not the ideal way to start a conversation, he quickly thought. Why I'm here. I live here duh," he said dryly. He smirked as he saw her eyes narrow, it seemed he was starting to get under her skin. "I also asked what are you? I know what happened with the fallen," she said quickly. Issei chuckled aloud. He was amused even more. "What's that got to do with anything? There are only a few reasons why you would want to know what I am, one reason just happens to correlate with my date. You knew the fallen was there and you wanted to come in and swoop up a new piece. Well, sorry to break it to you, princess, not gonna happen. Hell would freeze over before I become a slave." He spat. His temper was starting to rise, bit by bit. He saw her tense, he looked around to see the others start to as well. Kiba instantly got defensive of his master and spoke up. "Hey, give some respect. You don't know who you're talking to," he shouted. Issei snorted at his statement. "Oh really, pretty boy? Let's see Ria's Gremory, the crimson-haired ruined princess. Sister to Surzich's Lucifer," he started. They noticed his voice had a bit of an edge when Surzich's surname was said. They all started to feel uncomfortable. Ria's was starting to get angry. "If you know my brother, you must know how much influence he has in the devil world," she sneered. Issei laughed aloud, he was even more amused now than ever. Ha! Pulling the big brother card. Please Urziches can't touch me at all. He wouldn't be able to do squat to me. I'd like to see him try, the moment he would try something, he would learn otherwise. I promise you that. His eyes held a fiery glare. Briaz wasn't backing down, she stood up from her desk. What makes you think that, huh? She said quickly. Issei's eyes narrowed, this bitch was seriously testing his patience. Listen here bitch. I don't give a single shit about what you think you're entitled to. You can suck my left one for all I care. You're honestly really pissing me off now, about your brother. Please, I've seen what he can do. I know what his power is and what it can do, however, that doesn't make up for the fact he wouldn't know what the fuck to do if I show what my true power is. Even your precious Nekashu turned devil can tell it, she witnessed the power I unleashed on the fallen bitch. He spat. Everyone was shocked, they were expecting a fight to break out. Akeno's eyes had a dangerous glint in them. He turned to her and snorted. What? You want to say something? He spat. Akeno paled as she looked into his eyes, it was like a beast in a cage wanting to be free and rip everyone to shreds in the room. It was a demon that was locked up and could be released at any time. That's right, stay silent little fallen. He snorted. Everyone was thrown for a loop again. Akeno's eyes started to tear up a bit. He looked at them for a bit, he started to falter, his angel side was wanting to come out. Akeno looked up just in time to see his eyes that held something different, it shocked her. It was like 1,000 words unsaid, it made her instantly wonder what was going on in his head. She saw the pain and suffering reflected back at her, but it wasn't hers. It was his. She knew something was up now, and that Issei was hiding something big. A part of her wanted to find out what it was, but another part wondered what would come of it and if she would regret it. Now my patience is running very thin, almost like ice. So if you have nothing else to say, I'll be on my fucking way. He said quickly. He was pissed. They didn't even respond. They hadn't expected this thrashing to come from this meeting. It seemed they didn't know Issei Haidu that well, seeing that nothing more was going to be said. Issei quickly stood up and walked to the door. He stopped right in front of it. He had one final thing to say. Go ahead and tell your brother princess and see what comes from it. I suggest you stay the fuck away from me. He spat. He didn't even waste a second leaving the building. He was holding in his temper and not trying to destroy the whole place the whole time. He left in his wake a shocked group of devils. They didn't know what to do. Briaz on the other hand was furious, she was going to contact her brother. However she didn't know how futile it was really. What Issei said was dead on, and they were about to find it out firsthand in a few days. They would be shocked to their core at what they would witness and from what they would learn also. Issei was fuming as he walked back to the school, everyone knew something had happened. It was obvious, he was silent the rest of the day. As the final bell rang, Issei was actually glad to be able to walk out. As he did he noticed he was being stared at once more. He looked up with a glare and saw the student council president. She had a fierce glare too, he smirked. She wasn't backing down. He looked away and started walking home. He didn't know what caused him to, but he took a different route this time. He was walking alone when he suddenly felt a presence he knew all too well. The energy was identical to a part of him. He groaned as he knew who this was. He couldn't get a break, he reluctantly turned around to see someone he knew all too well. What do you want? Gabriel. He growled. Issei wasn't too thrilled to be visited right now, he turned to see the most beautiful person in heaven. That was what she was called, but in his mind that didn't matter. To him she was just another person who didn't understand. He had met her before and it wasn't pleasant, she had tried to reason with him that his hatred was something that needed to be let go, and that it was long overdue. He didn't like that too much, as he looked at her once again, he felt like history was repeating itself. What do you want? He asked quickly. He didn't have time for this. You made quite the show at that park the other day. She started. He groaned and stared at her. So what? He said dryly. She stared back at him and replied. We arrived shortly after you left, the other faction leaders were there. They know your name, but not what you are. She said. She didn't fail to notice Issei tense, he wasn't liking where this conversation was heading. You're on their radar Issei, you need to learn to let it go. She said. Issei's eyes narrowed. Let it go? He shouted. Gabriel sighed and realized she was only antagonizing him. She did notice his arm was starting to turn. It was a partial transformation. It was a red hand that had black veins bulging, he had razor claws that were midnight black. She saw the pitch black lightning that was coming off his hands as he clenched them. I pictured it as Nero's Devil Bringer from DMC4, just different colors and a bit more demonic. His demon form was coming out. Like I said the last time we met, you don't understand a damn thing of what I feel. Do you know what it's like to be abandoned by your own species because of what you are? I've felt this hatred for over 300 years and you expect me to forgive them for what happened?" he screeched. Gabriel flinched a bit. It seemed his hatred had grown since the last time they spoke. He was bitter for everything that happened to him. "You expect me to let go of 300 years of bitterness over the fact I'm a hybrid of two species who are complete opposites? Come on, I'm the unspoken taboo. Angels and devils don't mix, but yet here I am. The fact of the matter is, I'm done with everything." He spat bitterly. She watched as he turned around and started to walk away. She had one thing she needed to say. "There's something you might want to hear. If I'm right, it will make your secret come out a lot faster," she said. He stopped dead in his tracks. He glanced over his shoulder. Was she lying? She was an angel, so that wouldn't be the case. "What?" he said. The back was still turned to her. "The girl named Asia Argento is coming to the town. She was exiled out of the church for healing a devil. We didn't send her though. We believe she is being used for a bigger scheme of things. We think someone has plans for this town. All three factions have pieces here and you're the oddball. I'm sorry to say it, but your secret might not stay a secret soon," she said. Issei quickly cursed. She did have a point. It was something he might have to look into a bit further. If something was coming and shit hit the fan real fast, he needed to prepare. "Don't think this changes anything. I will not give up on it," he said quickly. She sighed as she watched him walk away. She knew it was about to get a lot harder. Issei didn't know what to think about the situation. He knew she was right. Things were going to escalate and shit would hit the fan fast. That's why he was going to prepare and do what needed to be done. It was only half an hour later when he heard a noise. He turned to see a girl with a nun's outfit on. He quickly mused that this was the girl who was sent here. He just had to be sure. "Excuse me, sir?" she suddenly asked. Issei was taken back. She looked so innocent. He wondered how she did it. How could she live in a world that wasn't what it seemed? To him it was shades of grey and black. One side was good and one was bad. The necessary evils. He thought of it like yin and yang. "Yes," he said. She was surprised at his tone. He sounded as if he was in a hurry. "I'm looking for a church, but I can't find it on the map," she said. Issei knew now this was her. The only church in town was at the edge of town. He pointed to a structure on the map. "That's it," he said. She quickly thanked him and was about to leave, but something interrupted them. A boy was crying. Issei watched as she walked over to him and said a few words. He was shocked when a green light appeared above the boy's scraped knee. Twilight healing, he thought. He knew now it was serious, that something was coming. He was about to ask her some questions when he felt a fallen's energy signature start to come closer. He quickly hid and watched as the same girl he took on a date came to pick the girl up. He knew he needed to intervene with whatever was going on, but the fallen angel knew who he was and what power he held. He would scare her off, and it would tip off whoever was running it. So he sat back and waited until they left. He knew where they were headed, so he didn't have to rush there. He needed to tell Kai first of what was about to happen. He was about to willingly storm the church. He knew something was being plotted behind the scenes, so he decided to jump in head first, instead of letting trouble find him, and it eventually would. Once he walked into his house, he saw Kai watching TV. He sighed to himself and prepared for what was about to be said. I need to talk to you," Issei started. Kai quickly looked at his face. He could tell it was serious. With a nod he turned to the TV and listened as Issei continued. "I met with the devils in the school today," he said, a bit begrudgingly. Kai's eyes widened. It was serious. He knew now. "What happened?" he asked. Issei flinched at his glare. Even if Kai was just a regular pure-blooded devil, Issei thought of him as a father figure, so when he gave a scrutinizing glare, it meant Issei was in for a lesson. "I told them in simple terms that we should avoid each other," he said vaguely. I didn't buy it. The look in Issei's eyes told him differently. "What were these simple terms?" he quickly asked. Issei sighed and decided to tell him. "They asked me what I was doing here. I said the obvious. That I was living here. Then they asked what I was. That's when it took a turn," Issei said. I still didn't look convinced. "How did the conversation turn after they asked what you are?" he asked quickly. Issei chuckled at the memory of what he told them. "I told off the Gremory princess, told her that her brother Surziches had nothing on me and that she needs to stay the fuck away from me," he confessed. I quickly sighed. Issei's temper sometimes got the better of him. He hoped that it would lessen soon. "Is that all?" he asked. He noticed Issei's face take on a different expression. He knew there was something else, and that it was big. Big enough to make Issei think more than once before rushing in. "Gabriel came to me today," he started. Kai's eyes widened. He knew something was deadly wrong now, due to the fact Gabriel had only visited a few times in his whole life. "What did she want?" he asked seriously. Issei looked at him directly in the eyes. Kai knew now it was serious, and that it affected both of them. She told me that a girl by the name of Asia Argento was sent to a church here. However, that church is abandoned. I believe that is where the Fallen who I took on a date is held up with her group. Something is wrong, the three factions all have pieces in this town. Something is coming," he said. I looked deep in thought for a moment. "So you think this town is the boiling pot for the next Great War?" he asked. Issei nodded. Kai knew something was wrong now. Kai was the wise one of the two of them, but Issei had the battle instincts, the ones that gave him a shiver up his spine when he thought something was wrong, and he was usually dead on with his instincts. "Is there anything else?" Kai asked. Issei nodded. "I saw the girl this morning, she had a sacred gear. One that, if my thoughts are right, only proves my point even more," Issei said. Eyes widened. If she had a sacred gear and the fallen angels were at the church, it didn't take an idiot to figure out what was going on. They were going to steal it. "What sacred gear?" he asked. Issei looked at him. "Twilight healing," he said. I cursed. Issei was right. Something was coming, and something big. "So you were thinking of going to this church to investigate?" Kai asked. Issei nodded. I looked up, he was in thought. If something was coming and it was starting at the church, it would be a good idea for him to investigate it and try to prevent it. "Okay then, go and see what is going on. Just try not to do anything that will reveal your secret," he said. Issei sighed and looked at him. "I think my secret isn't going to stay a secret for that much longer," he said. I sighed, he knew it was true too. A secret could only stay a secret for so long. It was inevitable. "Well, I guess we just have to prepare for the backlash of the supernatural world finding out," Kai said. Issei nodded. I watched as Issei walked out of the house and started on his way towards the church. It was only a short run there before he arrived at the base of the hill where the church was. It was time to make some noise. First thing he needed to do was find out who was there. So he walked near the church and sat down. He was using a technique he learned from one of his mentors. It was a type of senjutsu he picked up. He was sensing everyone's energies. His eyes widened when he found out the number that were there. He got a big number of hits. He could tell there was about 4 fallen angels and about 10 to 15 exorcists all in the building. They were most likely Rouge. He decided it was time to spring into action. Walking hastily towards the church doors, he quickly kicked them open. In the process of doing so, alerted everyone in the building to his presence. One person made Issei interested. He had a tall build, slim and muscular. Lean but not fat, he was obviously one of the exorcists. The main thing that caught his attention was his red eyes that had a crazy glint in them. Issei quickly deduced this man was insane. There was another man in there with him. Issei knew he was a fallen. He quickly mused the other fallen were downstairs along with Asia and the other exorcists. His train of thought was stopped when he heard a high-pitched laughter. It was maniacal. Issei shook his head. Yup, he was insane. Well, what do we have here? A shitty devil I get to run through?" He laughed. Issei watched bored as the man pulled out a revolver. Issei quickly mused they had blessed bullets. He stood there as 3 shots were fired. Issei didn't care that they were coming at him. They wouldn't do anything. His angel side prevented the holy element from affecting him. It was a yin and yang type thing. It was balanced. Boy, were they surprised when he took the bullets and didn't fall down. "Why didn't those affect you, boy? I can sense your energy and it reeks of demonic power, and there's something else there, but I can't figure out what it is." "It's masked," the fallen said. Issei grinned. "Oh, you've only breached the surface of the truth, my dear fallen. Well, in reality it's much more than you think," he said cryptically. He watched as the fallen angel's eyebrow raised in confusion. Issei looked to the exorcist to see him running out of patience. "Screw this," he shouted and charged with a sword. It was a holy one. Issei shrugged and charged forwards as well. Both of their eyes widened as he disappeared from their vision. He was extremely fast, but how? That was the unanswered question in their minds. Suddenly the exorcist was tossed across the room. However, there was still no sign of Issei. "Where are you?" the fallen shouted in a panic. He heard a chuckle behind him and turned around to see something that nearly scared the shit out of him. Issei's arm was once again partially transformed into his demon form. It had the same black lightning coursing through it, but instead of just his arm, the lightning was coursing through his whole body. "What are you?" the fallen screeched. The chuckle escaped Issei's lips. "I'm sure your friend Rainer had mentioned me after our little date," he said. His eyes widened as Issei's words processed in his mind. This was exactly the power that was described by Rainer, but it was more untamed and unleashed. Before he could even speak another word, Issei raised his hand up. "Egan," was all he said. The fallen watched in fear as black lightning condensed into a small ball. It was only a little while longer, and he was looking death in the eye as the ball shot towards him. There was nothing but the sound of a body hitting the floor. Issei quickly looked to the exorcist and cursed. He had gotten away while he was dealing with the fallen angel. He quickly got over it and proceeded downstairs. As he walked down there, he was horrified at what he saw. Asia was chained on a cross that was glowing. The ritual was beginning. I will say this first before I act. Anyone who surrenders now will not feel my wrath. Those who don't will feel what it is like to be an ant compared to a giant. He shouted aloud. They all instantly turned to him. Raynor's eyes widened as she saw him. She shivered in fear. He watched her whisper something to a blue-haired girl beside her. The girl beside her looked a bit hesitant, however they widened a few moments after. Issei assumed she told her who he was and what he could do. The one who was a lowly stood up and walked to the center of the platform where Asia was held. Oh? And what can you do, little kitty? She mocked. Raynor and the other girl's eyes widened in fear. Little kitty, huh? Issei muttered. The temper was already starting to light up. He hated people who were snotty and thought that they were above everyone else. This little kitty was about to shock her to death. Literally. No one saw what happened, but one moment Issei vanished and reappeared right before her. He had 2 fingers touching her chest. They all were shocked as they saw his demonic hand. Say, little girl, do you know what happens when a large amount of volts of electricity course through someone's body at once? He asked aloud. Everyone's eyes widened in fear, even the girl. She had no words. Just one thing happens. Death. He whispered, but everyone heard it. Those words made everyone freeze. It's a fairly simple thing actually. The body of a human being, whether it's fallen, devil or angels, can't withstand high amounts of volts. Basically your heart implodes. He said with a grin. She quickly looked at his hand. He grinned as he saw this. Tell your other fallen friend hi on the other side. He chuckled. Everyone's eyes widened once again. He was killed. The girl was about to scream for mercy, but her voice was caught in her throat as her body violently shook. It was only a second later that her body fell on the ground. She was dead. Issei quickly turned around and looked at the exorcists. It was time to deal with them. They had to be dealt with, that was certain in his mind. However, he didn't know why he was leaving the others alive. It wasn't in his nature. Maybe it was because they didn't give him a hard time when he entered the basement. Everyone watched as he raised his arm. They shivered as they felt a large increase in demonic energy. They saw a ball of black lightning form on his palm. It was big though. About a foot long in diameter. They feared for their lives as they watched him lift his hand up and make a horizontal motion. Soon a wave of lightning shot out towards the exorcists. One by one they fell on the ground, dead. He smirked as he turned towards the 2 fallen angels who cowered in fear. He quickly shot 4 lightning bolts at the chains that were holding Asia and caught her as she fell. He quickly checked to see if she was alright. It seemed they didn't complete the ritual in time. She was breathing, so that was fine with him. He looked to the fallen and thought about what to do with them. He was about to leave them to their own devices, but he felt the incoming presence of magic. Someone was coming. Shit. He muttered. The fallen looked at him confused. He looked at them. Okay, listen up you two, since you didn't get in my way foolishly. I will help you out here. Someone is coming here. With the massive power I unleashed, I can guarantee who it is. She already doesn't like me since I ripped into her at the school. He said. They were confused. Who was coming? Who is it? Raynor asked timidly. He sighed and looked at her. Ria's Gremory and her peerage. He said. Shit was correct. They were about to be confronted by the heiress of the Gremory clan. Now listen up, when we go out there don't speak unless you're spoken to. That way I can negotiate and do damage control. If you do this, I will help you out. He said. They both nodded, but they wondered how and why would he help them. Especially Raynor, who had tried to kill him. He quickly motioned for them to follow. Within a few minutes they arrived outside of the church just in time to witness 2 magic circles forming. Issei quickly cursed as he realized it was more than he thought. He set down the unconscious Asia just in case he needed to fight. Quickly you two, I have a feeling this is a bigger matter. No matter what, do not say anything offensive. I think I attracted a little bit more attention this time. He said. The both of them quickly nodded and they waited for them to finally appear. When they did, Issei had only one thought. Fuck me. He thought quickly after seeing who it was. It was Seraphol Leviathan with her sister's peerage and Serzich's Lucifer with his sister's peerage. It was a stare-off. No one said a single word. Issei knew this wasn't going to be nice and pretty, but the opposite of it. It was going to be very ugly. Ugly indeed. Standing in front of him were none other than the Mau Leviathan with her sister's peerage and the Mau Lucifer with his sister's peerage. Serzich's was glaring at him. He mused his sister told him what he said. After all, he didn't look that happy. Brady has a sister complex. He quickly thought with a chuckle. Still not a word was uttered. Issei was getting annoyed at this little game. It's like they were evaluating him. Well, are you going to say something or keep silent, looking dumber than hell? He suddenly said. Suddenly Serzich's turned to his sister and spoke. Riaz? "This was the boy you spoke to me about?" he asked. Riaz looked at him with a glare, she obviously thought he was about to be punished. "Yes, that's him, brother," she said. Issei just shook his head, he looked at Serafal and wondered why they were here. He didn't do anything to her sister, so he assumed they were here as backup if things got heated. Too bad they couldn't do anything to him, he quickly cursed as he realized his secret was going to come out. "Are you sure? I feel demonic energy from him, but it's small," Surziches said. Issei's eyebrows twitched, so he was mocking him. Oh, that made Issei want to deck him right now, sadly he was able to rein in his temper. "Yes brother, that is him," she said. Surziches turned to Issei and grinned. This poor fool didn't know what he was doing and what it would cause. "So you think you're more powerful than me, huh? Please don't make me laugh," he said aloud. Issei's eyes narrowed as he heard the snickers coming from behind the Mau. He caught a glimpse of Akeno looking directly at him, she wasn't laughing or mocking him. He knew something was up with her, but he had to think on that later. Now it was the time to show them just what he could do. "Please, you're nothing compared to me, even my father could smack you around like you were his bitch, but alas, he died over 300 years ago," Issei said aloud. The bomb was dropped on them. Serafal suddenly spoke up. 300 years ago? So you're saying you're over 300 years old?" she asked. Everyone looked to him as he looked upwards, seemingly at nothing. "Yes I am," he said. Their eyes widened. Surziches still decided to mock him even more. "Even if you are over 300 years old, I'd like to see you get a single hit on me," he said foolishly. Everyone's eyes widened at his shit-eating grin. They watched as he suddenly turned around to speak to the fallen angels. "You two might want to step back, I'm about to release a bit more power," he said suddenly. They quickly nodded and backed up, the others watched in confusion as Issei stepped a few feet forwards. "I will say this once. You asked for it," he said with a grin. They all watched in confusion as he didn't move at all, not a muscle. They suddenly tensed as they felt the demonic energy rise rapidly. Surzich's eyes widened as he felt it, he looked to Issei to him covered in a blood-red glow, however it soon disappeared. However something had replaced the glow, they all backed up quickly in fear as they looked at his arms, they had transformed into his demonic side. It was still partial and not the full form, Issei knew if he did turn into his full demonic form, it would be overkill. Surziches was nearly shitting his pants as he felt the demonic energy roll off in waves. What was this boy? He quickly thought. He couldn't get a word out as Issei suddenly disappeared. Surziches felt a sharp pain in his jaw that was followed by several shocks. Issei had delivered an uppercut and sent him flying in the air. Those around him watched as he disappeared again. They looked up to where Surziches was in time to see Issei delivering a follow-up kick that sent him hurtling downwards. He quickly disappeared once again, he was intending on finishing this. As he neared the downed body of Surziches, he reeled his fist back that charged even more with the demonic black lightning. However, as he swung, his fist was caught by someone, as he saw who it was. He roared in fury and drove his other fist straight to his face and twirled around and kicked his ribs and sent him flying away. That's when he heard a voice behind him. "Issei, stop this right now." It was female. It was Gabriel, and the person who was sent flying was Michael. The angels were here. Issei didn't even say a word, he currently didn't trust himself not to blow up and release his true demonic form. So he just stayed silent. "Really, Issei? That hurt?" Michael whined as he came over. He took a look at Surziches, the damage was already done. Then he looked at Michael and glared at the leader of the angels. "You shut your fucking mouth," Issei ordered Michael. Everyone else was wondering what was going on. Michael knew this was going to happen, he knew with what happened in the past it was inevitable. "I'm sorry for what happened in the past, Issei, I truly am, but to take your hatred this far is just plain stupid," he said. Serafal decided to speak up. "What is going on here?" she asked confused. Everyone else wanted to know. First Surziches was getting tossed around like a rag doll, and now the angels suddenly showed up and Issei displayed a profound hate for one of them. "We're here to stop a fight that would be catastrophic," Gabriel said. Issei looked around and breathed slowly, he was trying to calm himself down. He looked over to Surzich's sister, who was still glaring at him. "What are you looking at, bitch princess?" Issei roared. She flinched and looked away. Issei noticed Akeno was looking more intently at him, she was probably thinking what Issei had to do with the angels. Michael looked at Surziches and sighed. He picked him up and healed some of the bruises Issei gave him. Issei glared at the Mau Lucifer as he opened his eyes. Surzich's eyes widened as took in the scene around him. He turned to the angels and spoke. "Why are you here?" he asked suddenly. Gabriel looked at Issei as she spoke. "To prevent him from doing something foolish," she said. Surziches looked at Issei, he glared right back at him. "What do you have to do with him?" he asked. Michael decided to speak up. "Well, it's only part of it," he started. They wondered what was going to be revealed. What's part of it? Seraphol suddenly asked. Issei looked at her, he snorted as he knew what was about to be said. His secret was coming out. Michael suddenly looked empathetic towards Issei. Issei saw this, and his rage flared to live once again. Oh no. You don't get to feel sorry for what you did, you bastard. He shouted. Everyone suddenly looked to Issei, he had tears actually flowing from his eyes. Bakeno needed to know what was wrong, so she decided to ask. What happened? She asked. Issei suddenly turned to her. Michael was about to speak up, but Issei beat him to it. He was one of the angels who voted to cast my mother out of heaven and condemn her for giving birth to me, he said. That sent them for a loop. They looked to Michael to see him looking down. It was the truth. Issei, like we said before, we're sorry. He started. Issei's eyes narrowed. Sorry. 300 years of exile for what I am. All that bitterness and hatred built up, and all you say is sorry. Do you have any idea what it's like to be a hybrid of two species that don't get along? No, you don't, so save it. He shouted in fury. Bakeno's eyes widened as she heard him speak, so did everyone else. What was he? They thought. That's when it hit everyone. It was part of him, which meant he was part angel. Issei, even if you're a hybrid, you need to make your own path. Gabriel said. Issei glared at her. I am making my own path. I have two opposite species in my blood. What do you think I've been doing the past 300 years? He spat. Seraphol couldn't take it anymore, it was itching at her to find out. What are you? She asked. Issei glared at her, then sighed. It was time. What am I? Well, I'm a myth. He said vaguely. They wondered what he meant. Bakeno had a sneaky suspicion on what he was. What are your two species? She asked. He sighed, he knew there was no escaping it. I'm a Nephilim. He said. Seraphol's eyes widened, so did Serzich's. It seemed they knew what that word was. Impossible. Serzich's shouted. Issei glared at him. Ha! Impossible, you say. You want proof? He retorted. Seraphol's eyes widened at his statement. What's a Nephilim? Riaz suddenly asked. The other people who didn't know the term wanted to know. I am a Nephilim, and it is a hybrid of angels and devils. Issei said aloud. Everyone's eyes widened at his proclamation. Bakeno no understood why the way he was exiled by both his species and grew up only know grief, hatred and sadness for something he couldn't change. Everyone looked to him as he was silent, he was about to release his wings. When he did, boy were they shocked. No, that would be an understatement, they were completely stupefied at what they looked like. He had 4 pairs of wings, 4 being angel and the other 4 being devil, and they didn't look like a normal angel or devil wings. On his right side were the angel wings, but the feathers were a mix of blue and red. On his left side were the devil ones, but they were blood red in color and had blue pulsing veins on them. These were the wings of a Nephilim. No one had any words to say, it was the number of wings he had which shocked them. Who is your father? Seraphol asked. Issei sighed and spoke up. My father is the original Lucifer, the morning star. He said aloud. Everyone's eyes widened for the umpteenth time that day. That's what he meant by his father died over 300 years ago in the Great War. They were finally putting the pieces together and now understood where his power came from. Serzich's was dumbfounded by the information. He needed to do something quick before it was too late. I think he needs to come to the underworld and meet the council. If this stayed secret for any longer it would be bad. He said, foolishly. He didn't know how much hatred Issei held. Michael and Gabriel knew what was about to happen, and they had no way of stopping it. Listen here, you piece of shit, you have no control over me. I'm not doing what you say because you took my father's title. Ha, your sister should have told I'm not a slave. He spat. Seraphol was starting to understand why this boy's hatred was so large. Serzich's on the other hand was getting annoyed by the lack of respect he had. Oh? And what makes you think you have a choice? He said aloud. Before anyone could see him, Issei vanished again, but this time appeared right before Serzich's. However, this time he had a blue and white sword that had frost covering it. It was placed against Serzich's neck. Everyone could feel the holy power the sword had. You know how powerful a holy presence is against devils, so why do you keep testing me? He said aloud. Serzich's was deadly silent, he could feel the cool metal press against his skin, the holy presence was there as well. He had no doubt the boy could increase its power as well, he knew now it wasn't wise to anger the boy. Grunting, he pulled away and looked at the boy. He knew he couldn't take him by force, he needed to think of something. However, before he could say something, Issei decided to speak up. I'm done here. He started. Issei then looked at the angels. You two can finish up here. He said. He then turned to the devils. Take this warning seriously, I don't care if you think you're entitled to something. Stay out of my way and we will be fine. He said. They watched as he turned to the two fallen angels and the girl that was unconscious. He picked up Asia and walked back to Gabriel. "You told me about her, so you fixed the mess your own faction has caused," he said. He tossed her to Gabriel, who caught her quickly in her arms. She sighed as she watched him walk back to the fallen. "Since you two did do what I asked, I'll give you a choice. Go back to the Grigori or you can stay with me," he said aloud. They both were shocked. He was willing to let them stay with him. It was either that or go back to the Grigori where they would be punished. "We'll stay with you," they both said quickly. Issei nodded. He sighed and looked up as his tucked his wings back in. He motioned for them to follow him as they stood up and walked behind him. They wondered how this was going to play out. They wanted to ask him some questions. However, they knew it wasn't the right time. Back at the church area, the group of devils and angel watched his retreating form with the fallen angels. No one had any words to say. Their minds had been blown from what they had learned. Gabriel quickly spoke up. "Now that you know the truth, you know why he had to stay a secret," she said. Seraphil understood that, but she was wondering one thing: why did he help the fallen? Why did he willingly go out of his way to help those two fallen angels? She asked. Everyone else wanted to know, even Akeno, who was shocked silent at the news. Gabriel sighed and showed a small smile. "You see, with what has happened to him, he has developed a sense of justice. Not just in the sense of what happened to him either. He doesn't like unnecessary bloodshed, if you will. It's the same reason he didn't attack you or anybody else. It was Surziches who provoked him, so he thought it was necessary to prove a point. I'd guess that those two surrendered when he offered the chance, and as such they were spared from his wrath," she explained. Akeno had a question that she needed to ask, so she quickly spoke up. "When we had our first meeting, even though it didn't go too well, I saw something for a split second that I wasn't sure if it was real or not," she said. Gabriel turned to her. "What did you see?" she asked. Everyone looked to Akeno as she replied. "It happened when he mentioned my other side. In his eyes were a demon that was locked up wanting to get out. However, the next time I looked into them, it was completely different. It showed pain and sadness all bundled up," she said. Gabriel smiled sadly and spoke up. "You see, he has two forms. I'm sure you might have noticed it somewhat. His eyes and body start to change. Red is his demonic side and blue is his angel side. You see, his two sides are like yin and yang. One couldn't survive without the other, and at the same time they constantly conflicting with each other. It's like a debate deciding what to do. What you saw is what side was currently being used. Mostly his demonic side is used due to his rage. However, there are times where he falters and the angel side comes out. That sadness and pain you saw was what he has been holding in all these years," she explained. Everyone looked down at the news. Someone had that much in him that needed to be let out. They wondered how he could withstand it all, every day the same thoughts, and no choice in the matter. Now they understood what he was and why he was the way he was. Some of them were sad about it, some knew they had to help him. However, they knew it would be futile. Gabriel looked at Michael, who nodded. It was time to return to heaven. "You guys can do whatever you want with this information that has been said today. Just know now that his secret is out. That he will only have more reason for his hatred to grow," she said. Before they left, Gabriel looked at Riaz, who stared right back at her. "You of all people should stay away from him. You're probably the last person who would want to talk to you. You would only make it worse," she said. She then turned to Surziches. "You're lucky we got here when we did, or there might have been some casualties," she said. Everyone looked at the angels as they entered their own magic circle and left the area. In the aftermath of it all was a shocked group of devils with no idea what to do. The walk home was annoyingly silent. Rainer and Kalwerner didn't know what to expect for the son of Lucifer. They were just as shocked as everyone else who learned his true identity. Suddenly they stopped walking. As he stopped, he turned to them and began to speak. "Listen, you don't need to be afraid of me. As long as you follow a few simple rules, we'll be fine. I know you must have a lot of questions, but hold them off until we get to the house. I should warn you of my guardian Kai. He may be a bit apprehensive, but that's just because he's like a father to me. He's been with me since the beginning," he said suddenly. Their eyes widened quickly. He was being this friendly to them after Rainer tried to kill him. Kalwerner didn't know what was going through his head. She needed to know. She spoke up. "Why are you being so nice?" she asked quickly. She watched him sigh. She thought she might have angered him a bit, but he replied in a soft tone, which took them for surprised once again. "It is no secret that I am a hybrid of two species that have clashed against each other since the beginning of time. It is the same for me. They are constantly fighting each other to get control. Which form takes hold is dependent on emotion. It's like I have an angel on my shoulder and a devil on my back, or vice versa. They always want me to do one thing while the other wants the opposite. It's a yin and yang type thing. It's balanced as well," he explained. Their eyes widened again. It made sense to them. Also, with everything that has happened to me, you could say I developed a need of justice. I always wanted to get payback for what my life was turned into. I've learned past that though, I don't care anymore though. I do what I want when I want to. You wanted to know the reason you're still alive. When I asked you to surrender, you did. I don't like to spill blood that is unnecessary, only if it is truly needed, only then is when I will act. He explained. But that said, he continued to walk again. He didn't say anything afterwards. They listened as he spoke and started to understand what he felt. However, they didn't understand at all. That was what stuck to them in their minds. No one truly understood him. He was an enigma of sorts. It was obvious to them he put on a mask to cover his true feelings. They hoped someone could break through his walls and help him. Little did they know fate was already at play making that happen. Someone was going to break through his walls eventually, and it would change everything. However, that wasn't going to happen for a while. Before they knew it, they arrived at his house. It wasn't fancy or anything along those lines. Just a simple 2-story house. It seemed to have about 4 rooms. So it would be fine for them. As he walked to the door, he suddenly stopped and turned around. When we go in there, don't say anything. Let me do the talking. Kai is a little apprehensive, as I said before, but after he gets to know you, he won't mind you living here. He said. They both nodded and followed him in the house. Issei looked at the man at the counter. He had his back turned to them. Rainer and Kalwerner couldn't feel any demonic energy coming off of him. Was he human? No, that couldn't be right. There was something they didn't know. Once he turned around and saw them, he narrowed his eyes and looked at Issei, who wasn't flinching or backing down at his glare. Ice. Who are these people? Why have you brought Fall into our home? He asked seriously. Issei began to explain what happened at the church. Kai's eyes softened as he heard about the confrontation with the devils. He looked at the 2 girls who were going to be living there. It was like he was evaluating them. They watched as Kai and Issei looked at each other again. It was like they were having a silent conversation with just the way they looked at each other, like they knew what the other was thinking. So you're going to be staying here, huh? Fine by me. Just remember to do what Issei says. He quickly said. They wondered what he meant by that. What do you mean by that? Rainer quickly asked. I looked at Issei for a moment. You see, there was a reason I offered you a place to stay. He said suddenly. They wondered what was his reason. Do you guys know what the reason behind taking that girl's sacred gear was? Did Kakebiel actually tell you? I assumed not, since you're really only pawns in his mind. He said aloud. They were shocked. Why was he asking this now? In truth, they were just following orders. I figured as much. You see, your leader of your little group forgot to mention that he plans on starting another war between the factions. He chose this town for a very particular reason. He explained. They were shocked as they heard him. They listened as he continued to explain. You see, all 3 factions have pieces in this town. Some are more important than others. He knows this and is planning on exploiting this little fact. Asia was just the tip of the iceberg. To have Twilight healing on your side is a very big advantage in a battle. This town is a powder keg essentially, just waiting for the right spark to set it all ablaze. Your little group is one side of the situation, the Fallen. The other pieces are the devils. In this town you have 2 peerages that just happen to be siblings of 2 of the current devil kings. Seraphol Leviathan and Surzich's Lucifer. If Kakebiel were to kill those 2 peerages, which that would be pretty easy for a cadre class, that would be the spark that would ignite it all. Soon the angels would have to decide whether or not to join in or stay neutral. Which would work for a while, but they'd eventually be dragged in, and Kakebiel would have his second great war started. He explained. That shocked them big time. They were just pawns in the bigger scheme of things. However, that made them wonder if Issei could handle Kakebiel pretty easily. Couldn't you handle him fairly well? Rainer suddenly asked. They looked to him to see him deep in thought. I mean, you did toss around Surzich's like he was nothing. Kalwerner added. Suddenly Issei chuckled and turned to them. If it was a real fight, I'd have to truly fight. Kakebiel isn't the type to hold back. You see, my power has very special properties. They are sometimes a very deadly combo if used right. He said quickly. They watched as he held out his hand, and the familiar black lightning started to spark to life. You see, this lightning has some very special properties. It can be used in more than one way. With the addition of a normal attack, it can be used as a buff. When applied to my body, it increases my movement speed by a good bit. It also sharpens my senses. It also increases my brain power. In doing so, it allows me to think 3 to 4 steps ahead of my opponent. With all these combined, it becomes very deadly with my power. That is how I got the drop on Surzich's. Now, if he'd known beforehand of who I was and what I could do, I can assure you that it wouldn't have played out that way. Surzich's had power alright, and if we were to fight for real, I'd have to truly use my power, that I can guarantee you. He explained. They widened their eyes once again as they heard him. To have something like that in your arsenal was indeed very powerful. They now understood that he not only had real power, but he had the techniques that he could use that would put someone 6 feet under if used right. "That's why I'm going to train you," he said with a grin. They gulped, they had no idea what to expect from this. "However, that won't be until tomorrow after school. Speaking of school, I'm going to get you enrolled," he quickly said. They widened their eyes once again. He was going to get them enrolled. How? They doubted the devils would like 2 fallen angels at their school. They wondered what he was thinking. Before anyone knew it, the morning came and it was time for Issei to get ready. He was already rushing around the house getting his stuff together. Kalwerner and Rainer could believe their eyes. Someone like him acted like that in the morning. It was obvious to them that there were things that they obviously didn't know about Issei Haidu. They watched as he left the house and they turned towards Kai as he looked at them. It seemed this day was going to be an interrogation. Scene break with Issei. Issei knew this day was going to suck, he just hoped they would stay as far away from him. He already planned on visiting the student council office to speak with the president about enrolling Kalwerner and Rainer. He really hoped that the princess wouldn't bother him or she'd learn not to very fast. He was damn sure about that thought. He groaned as he stepped on the school grounds. He was already be watched like a hawk. Shaking his head, he ignored them and walked forwards. He knew this was bound to happen anyways. However, he didn't know who was watching him, and it was someone who felt pretty sorry for him. They knew they needed to try to get through his barriers and walls. They didn't know how though. Before anyone knew it, class was already in session. Issei knew once lunchtime came around it was going to be a long day. He knew what to expect when he dropped by the student council office. He knew how it could turn ugly real quick. He needed to stay calm and not let them annoy him or antagonize him. As lunch finally rolled around, he decided it was time to go. However, as he was currently walking towards the student council room, he felt something was wrong. Like it wasn't going to go the way he wanted, something was going to happen. He found himself behind the door ready to knock. He knew once he did there was no going back. Nothing would ever be the same. He knew that was already the case. His secret was already out and it was only going to reach more ears soon. He couldn't stop it either. Stealing his nerves, he knocked 3 times. He heard a few hushed tones through the door. He couldn't really make out what was being said though. He also didn't care. He came here for one thing and one thing only. However, a part of him knew he was going to get more than he bargained for. As soon as the door opened, he felt the immediate rise in magical energy. They tensed as they saw who it was. Issei sighed as he knew this was going to happen either way. He put his hands up in a surrendering pose. He wanted to get the message across that he wasn't their enemy. "You have no need to be afraid of me, albeit I am considerable more powerful, and you did see what I did to the current Lucifer," he said. He obviously noticed the distaste in his tone when he said Lucifer. They wondered how he truly felt about everything. He noticed they were still a little apprehensive, but the danger he sensed had gone away. "Well, what do you want?" a voice suddenly said. Issei turned to the voice to see a boy with short but spiked blonde hair and gray eyes. Issei raised an eyebrow at the boy's tone. He was a little bit arrogant, but Issei heard something else beneath the surface. The boy simply cared for the peerage and would do whatever it took to protect them. Issei didn't mind that at all. It was something in his mind that was respectable. "I'm here to speak to your master about a very important matter," he said calmly. He was in a nest of devils after all. He wasn't one to make foolish decisions. No, he planned them out and acted on them accordingly. This time he just happened to have some bad luck and ended up in the heart of the matter. He needed to be careful. There was no doubt about that whatsoever in his mind. "Oh? What would that be?" A new voice spoke up. Issei turned to see her. She had a bob-cut hairstyle and pair of short-rimmed glasses. This was Sona Citri, or Sona Shitori, the student council president. She gazed at Issei for a few moments. It was like she was evaluating how to take him on if push came to shove. He wondered if she would be able to do that actually. Did she have the resolve to try to take him on, despite knowing who he was and what he could do? Issei sighed and took a seat. He knew this was the hardest part. "I wanted to talk to you about a possible enrollment for 2 students. They are the fallen angels I saved," he said quickly. The reaction was immediate. Eyes widened and they tensed. Issei felt the danger come back to him as the energy arose swiftly in the room. Everyone was edge. "Oh? Why would they need to come here?" Sona asked through gritted teeth. Issei sighed and once again raised his hands in an attempt to placate them quickly. He needed to dissolve the tension in the room quickly. "Listen, I'll be honest. I'm going to be very blunt about this. Sorry if I come off as offensive in any way," he quickly said. That caught their attention very quickly. They started to listen as he continued on. "I'll share some info with you. This town is a powder keg and something is going to happen very soon. In reality, I couldn't give a flying fuck what happens. However, that doesn't dispute the fact that I live in this town and I would eventually be dragged into a conflict. All I want is for them to be able to enroll here so I can keep a close eye on them." "I'll give you 2 favors that you can ask me for if you get them enrolled," he said. As soon as he said that, Sona got a grin on her face. Which creeped Issei out a bit. Devils were known to be crafty and have ulterior motives. What was she planning? He quickly thought, after all the Citri clan was known for its intellect. They seemed to stare at each other for a long time. Issei knew she was planning something. "Any favor?" she asked quickly. That surprised Issei. He quickly thought about what she could possibly ask. Nonetheless, he knew it couldn't be outrageous. If it was, he would be damned before doing what she asked, and if he had no way out, that was fine too. He would just do what she wanted and be done with it. "As long as it's not completely crazy," he replied. She was silent for a while before looking at him. "I will see what I can do," she said. He nodded and stood up. "Very well, and since I know our relationship isn't the best. Also the fact that yours overall isn't good with the other factions, I will say this. I will keep them on a leash," he said quickly. They were silent as he walked out of the office. It seemed it worked, however Issei knew a few issues were going to stem from this little meeting. The first thing he knew was the information he passed on would be told to the higher-ups. He knew Sona would tell her sister, and that would most likely result in a meeting with Serafel. He didn't know how that would turn out. He would have to cross that bridge when the time came. There were more important matters that needed to be dealt with at first. Those matters entailed training the 2 fallen angels so that they could handle themselves against a tough opponent. He also needed to get back into shape a bit. In truth, he did let himself fall short a bit of what his training used to be like. It was time for him to show all of them what he could really do. Rainer and Kalwerner sat in the house as Kai started to speak to them. It was going to be a long day for them. "So any particular reason why Issei spared you?" he seemed to ask Rainer. His voice was scrutinizing, like he was searching for any sort of deception or deceit. Who was this guy? They both thought quickly. "I know what I did was wrong, and I made his life much worse than it was. I truly want to make amends with him," Rainer said suddenly. Kalwerner looked at her in shock. Rainer wasn't usually like this. Did this boy already start to change her? She thought. She turned to Kai to see his expression soften. "I think you mistook me for being angry. Honestly, I'm glad that you did what you did," he said jokingly. Both of them whipped their heads to him in shock. What was he getting at? They both thought quickly. "What do you mean?" Kalwerner asked, confused. Why was he glad that Rainer attacked them on his date? She wanted to know badly. I sighed before speaking up. "I care for Issei quite a bit. I've raised him. However, I will admit he has some flaws that need to be fixed. Firstly, he is stubborn. I'm sure you might have noticed it a bit. Not wanting to answer or do anything. It is because of this he is reluctant to let go of his hatred, which will be a really tough thing for him to do. After that date happened, I knew things would start to change with him. I saw it from the beginning when he got home that night," he explained. They both widened their eyes as they heard his explanation. It was understandable, but at the same time it was a sick, twisted sense of logic. Seriously, who the fuck was he? They both thought. You may think it's a bit fucked up, and it is. However, there are only a few things that can make Issei see things differently. One is emotions. His emotions are locked inside, never wanting to show them. The other is the truth. Once he sees it bluntly and it dents in his mind, it stays there and he never forgets it, Kai explained. Rainer and Kalwerner started to feel what he felt a bit. However, it was only a small fraction of what he felt. But all those years of bitterness and being alone has made a big impression on him. As such, he's very reluctant to trust people. Especially devils and angels, he said. Kalwerner wondered how Gabriel was able to speak to him and get him to calm down though. What about Gabriel and Michael? Gabriel was able to keep him at bay at the church. Michael, on the other hand, just fueled his rage. Kalwerner asked quickly. I chuckled a bit before replying. Gabriel is someone he learned he could trust through the years of them butting heads. Michael, on the other hand, is someone he hates with a passion, Kai explained. Rainer remembered what Issei said at the church. Is it true that he voted to cast his mother out of heaven? She asked. Both of them widened their eyes as Kai nodded numbly. Issei's thoughts on his parents are very complicated. He loathes his father. He never was a supporter of the old Mag faction. He doesn't want world domination or anything like that. His mother is the opposite, however he never met her. That is the one thing that makes him hate the angels more than anything. Since Michael voted to cast his mother out of heaven, Issei hates him like none other. He explained. The pieces were coming together now. Why Issei showed such a profound hate for the leader of the angels. It was making sense now. They wondered what it would be like if he blew his top and raged. What would it be like if Issei truly let out all his anger and hate at a single person? Kalwerner suddenly asked. I paled at the thought, he gulped before replying. Whoever the fool that would be the cause of it would not know what he unleashed. Issei would most likely go full-blown demonic form and obliterate them, and most likely anyone that was foolish enough to get in his way. He said softly. Both of them were shocked, they should have expected it though. Rage was a very influential and powerful emotion for someone to have, and for Issei it was 10 times worse. They shuddered at the power that would be unleashed. Is there anything or someone who has enough influence on him that would be able to calm him down before he unleashed such a thing on an opponent? Rainer asked. I looked up for a moment, he was in thought for a good bit. Maybe. If Issei were to have a romantic relationship with someone that he truly felt something deep for, the angel form might take over if the person does something that shocks him out of it. He said. He looked down after speaking. However, we all know that is basically impossible. Issei would have to let go of all his hatred to let someone in like that. He said softly. Both of them nodded numbly, they knew how hard that was going to be for him. However, none of them knew fate was already in motion, and it was going to start making it happen very soon. Suddenly the door opened, revealing none other than Issei. Kai looked at the clock and sure enough school was out and it was about time for him to arrive home. So how did it go today? Kai asked quickly. All of them waited for his answer. Decent, no one tried anything. I managed to convince the Citri to let those two in, for a price of course. He shrugged. They wondered what he meant by a price. What price? Kai asked suspiciously. Issei rolled his eyes and sat down. I offered the girl 2 favors, as long as they weren't crazy I would do them. He explained. Rainer and Kalwerner seemed surprised by that. What if they tried to get the best of him and something happened that he didn't like? They both thought quickly. What if they try to recruit you into a peerage? Rainer asked quietly. The cold humorless laugh escaped out of his mouth as he heard her. His eyes though held a fury that resembled 1,000 souls wanting vengeance. He spoke in a cold tone. If they did, they are utterly stupid to think I would ever become a slave. Even so, I'm too powerful for evil peace to work on me, they would be foolish to even think about that. He said. Rainer and Kalwerner flinched from his tone, it was obvious nothing good would come from the outcome. They wondered though what the Citri heiress was going to use those favors, they knew Citri were known for being intelligent. So they knew she wouldn't do something stupid to anger him. So you two, are you ready? Issei suddenly asked. They both turned their heads to him. Ready for what? Rainer asked. I chuckled and Issei just rolled his eyes. Training, remember? I told you guys that I was going to train you. As it stands, you are ants compared to Kakabiel. If he were to attack soon, you'd just be cannon fodder. He said dryly. Both of them dropped their jaws in horror, that's how he thought of them. They both thought. He looked at them and rolled his eyes. Seriously, you should know I'm going to be blunt. It's better that way, the truth hurts, yes, but it makes us realize what we need to do to change that same truth. No one ever gets the easy route, if that were the case everyone would be soft and wouldn't lift a single finger when faced with real danger. He explained. They looked at him in shock, he was being blunt, yes, but his words had meaning. Kai smirked as they started to realize he was right. Issei may tend to be blunt and straightforward when it comes to what he says, but his words are the truth and he wants them to see it clearly. That is how he was taught after all. Okay then, when are we training? Kalwerner asked. Issei chuckled and spoke up. A bit of warning first, I'm going to break you. I'm going to dent what matters in your skull so you'll never forget it, you're going to be weakened and worn out after I'm done with you. He gave a sadistic grin. They both gulped as they heard him, they wondered what this training would entail. Don't worry, you'll survive. He chuckled. That didn't really help them at all, they knew this was going to suck. You got 5 minutes, I'm gonna go change my clothes and we'll begin. He said. They watched as he walked upstairs. They gulped as they knew it was real. Don't worry about it, just do what he says and make sure you remember it. It will save your life when it matters, a bit of warning before you start. His methods are cruel and brutal, don't expect him to go easy on you too. Kai said suddenly. They gulped once again and waited for the inevitable. 5 minutes later Issei came downstairs in a new outfit. He was wearing a pair of black and red shorts with a matching t-shirt, both of them looked in awe of how much muscle he had. It showed how much he actually trained. He also had a duffel bag strapped around his shoulder, they wondered what could be in it. No doubt it had to do with their training. Are you two ready? He asked. They both nodded numbly. He walked over to them and started to make a magic circle. Once it was all ready, they stepped in it and transported to their destination. As they popped out of it, they found themselves in pitch darkness. 1 sec. Issei said quickly. They stood still as they heard footsteps going away from them. A few minutes later a switch was flipped and the lights turned on. They were obviously in an abandoned building. It seemed like a gym to them. What is this place? Kalwerner asked. Issei looked at her for a moment before replying. An abandoned research building on the outskirts of Kyoto, we're pretty far away from civilization from here. I found it about 50 or so years ago and turned it into my personal training spot. He shrugged. Both of them looked around the place for a good bit, they turned to Issei as he sat the bag down and walked over to them. Okay, what are we doing? Kalwerner asked. They knew it was going to be tough and tiring, but they didn't know how much though. Firstly, some rule to always remember in a fight. He started. They raised their eyebrows as they heard him. What rules? Raynor asked. Suddenly Kalwerner lurched forwards as she was sucker punched in the gut. Raynor looked in shock as Issei stood above her. What was that for? She shouted. Issei sighed and looked at her. First thing is expect the unexpected. You're never gonna get the luxury of an opponent letting you know their plans. Always have your guard up even if the fight is just getting started. He explained. Raynor kneeled down by Kalwerner to see if she was alright, however she was suddenly elbowed in the back and sent to the ground. Second thing is never take your eye off your opponent. If I was a true enemy with the intent to kill, you'd be dead. He said. Raynor was getting back up along with Kalwerner. Raynor let her temper get the best of her and she charged blindly at the boy. He easily caught her fist in his right hand, with a kick to her ribs she skidded back. Issei sighed and looked at her. Third thing is don't underestimate your opponent, nor do you want to overestimate your own strength. Don't be cocky or arrogant, it may get you put 6 feet under. He said. He got into a stance and motioned for both of them to come at him. They both charged with their wings out. Issei chuckled as he simply dodged and blocked their attacks. They had no coordination to them, they weren't even trying to confuse him or distract him. He decided to take it up a notch. Raynor was closing in with a fist aimed at his face. He quickly grabbed it and took a hold of her arm. He then swung her around and used her like a bat and hit Kalwerner back with the body. He then launched her up in the air and charged up a small bolt of lightning. It wasn't that deadly or lethal. It would give her a good shock though. He quickly shot it right at her in midair. She hit the ground with a thud. Seriously, are you guys even trying? You're not even scratching me. Here's your next lesson, use teamwork to your advantage. Coordinate an attack that would make me choose between which one to take head on, so I wouldn't have the choice to dodge it. Also don't be afraid to use underhanded techniques, anything is fine in a real fight. Your opponent would do the same to you. He said aloud. They both blinked and stood up. They both looked at each other for a few moments. Issei got into a defensive stance as he knew they were coming up with something. He then saw Raynor smirk. She quickly transformed into her true form and started to squeeze her breasts together. Issei blinked as he didn't expect this, however he should have. Fallen angels were known for falling for their sins, and most of the time it was lust. In that moment he was temporarily stunned. He was hit in the ribs with a light spear. Once he got back up, Raynor spoke. How is that for underhanded? She snickered. He chuckled and cracked his joints. It was time to get serious. Definitely underhanded. Time to take it up a notch. He chuckled. They watched as his hand turned demonic, with the demonic lightning crackling off it. He gave a sadistic grin. Before the both of them knew it, he was in between the two of them. He quickly grabbed Kalwerner and launched her towards Raynor with a ton of force. Both of them were sent spiraling into the wall. 5 minutes later they both got up sluggishly and walked over to Issei. Remember, never let your guard down, all it takes is one mistake and the tide of the battle turns for the worse. He said quickly. They watched as he went to his bag and opened it up. It was filled with baseballs. What the fuck? They both thought. Issei grabbed the bag and dragged it over to them. He looked at them with a cruel smile. Next lesson is to use your body to an advantage, let it do what it wants. Let instinct take over, fight or flight. All of these mean the same thing, you must be able to think and act at the same pace. If you can do this, you will be able to dodge nearly anything. He said suddenly. Kalwerner looked just in time to see Raynor getting struck with a powerhouse throw. Issei adopted a smirk and spoke up. You'd better dodge. He smiled. They gulped as he began throwing like a crazy bastard. 30 minutes later baseballs were scattered across the room and the two of them had bruises like none other. They couldn't feel anything, they were sure a few bones were broken. That was honestly good enough for today. He said suddenly. They widened their eyes as his hair started to turn blue. It was small and near imperceptible. However, they could feel the holy presence coming off of it. He was starting to turn into his angel form. However, the sensation died down and in his hand was a ball of blue light. But the swift motion he threw it at the two of them and they were both covered in a blue glow. They were healing. They looked at him stunned. Training was going to be like this all the time. To be trashed around the whole time before getting healed so he could do it again. They both thought horrified. Okay, time to go back, we do have school tomorrow. He said. They quickly got up and walked over to him. They stepped back into the magic circle and reappeared back at the house. Kai smiled at seeing them. It seemed progress was starting to happen after all. So how'd it go? He asked. Issei shrugged with a smile. They will get the hang of it eventually. He replied. I nodded with a smile. He was about to speak up again. However, a knock on the door grabbed everyone's attention. How is it? The girls asked suddenly. I and Issei looked at each other, their eyes narrowed. No one really ever comes by that often, it's someone who is a part of the supernatural no doubt. Kai spoke up. He looked at the door cautiously as Issei got up and walked over to it. He opened it up and narrowed his eyes. Standing in front of him was Seraphol Leviathan. She had a small smile on her face as he answered it. "May I come in?" she asked respectfully. Issei breathed in and out quickly. He was trying to avoid getting angry over something like this. Usually when people came over they wanted something. This was no different. The question was, just what did she want? Issei seriously didn't want to fucking deal with this shit, not at all. However, he couldn't deny the truth of the gravity of the situation that was currently standing in front of him. Sure, he could slam the door in her face and tell her to come back when hell freezes over, and boy was he tempted to do just that. However, that was utterly foolish and something even he knew would cause more trouble for him in the future. After the woman standing in front of him just happened to be the current Leviathan. Fuck me. Issei thought to himself. He quickly looked back to Kai and watched as he nodded back. Kai quickly turned to the two girls and say a few words. Issei watched as they both walked upstairs. He turned back to Seraphol and forced a smile. "Sure, come right in," he said through gritted teeth. She flashed a smile back and walked in as he moved aside. As she stepped inside the house she looked around. It was a fairly normal house. She saw Issei and his friend sitting down on the couch. She quickly took a seat across from them. "So why are you here?" Issei asked bluntly. Seraphol frowned. She should have expected him to be like this, from what she heard from her sister. She cleared her throat and prepared to get down to business. She couldn't be her normal self here. This was a very dangerous situation she had brought on herself. She looked at the son of Lucifer and spoke. "I'm aware of your distaste for devils, however I'm here for some information that you gave my sister regarding this town and something that is coming." She said it counts as a favor. "I'm here for that reason," she said respectfully. She had to be careful. This boy was a ticking time bomb, and one wrong mistake and she would invoke his wrath. He didn't want to give up his information, but nonetheless the Citri called in a favor. She was caught off guard as he spoke. "Firstly, I don't hate all devils. I just loathe the ones that are power-grabbing assholes who try to flex their political muscles and try to make other people bend to their will. So as long as you don't cross any lines, we'll be fine. Now onto that problem, it's not conclusive yet. However, we will share with you what we currently have," he said. That surprised her a good bit. It seemed she judged him a bit too quick. She needed to see past the stone-cold expression and see what was deep inside of him. "What is going to happen?" she asked quickly. I turned to Issei and gave a glare. Seraphol noticed this and wondered who this was. "May I ask who is your friend Issei?" she asked quickly. She needed to know if there was a danger to him. Kai chuckled and spoke up. "Seraphol, I'm only Issei's guardian. I was trusted by Lucifer himself to raise the boy," he said simply. She was shocked. He knew Lucifer. She was more interested in this man now than ever. "May I ask what was your relationship to the man himself?" she asked kindly. I sighed and knew it was time to drop a bomb of a secret. Even Issei looked Kai nervous. He knew what he was about to say. "I was a part of the old Mag faction," he said simply. That shocked her, big fucking time. She wondered what piece he was, since he barely let off any demonic energy. She instantly got unnerved, since he was old Mag. I chuckled and began to speak. "I can see you're at a loss for words. Most likely you're wondering why you can't feel any demonic energy from me, or that I might be an enemy. I've learned past that though. You see, I've learned a technique that helps me mask my energy signature, so I could stay hidden for all those years raising this boy," he explained. She was shell-shocked by that statement. It was obvious by his smirk that she wasn't going to find out more about him, but she knew he was powerful enough to handle himself. She turned to Issei and decided to go back to what she was here for. "So what do you guys know about what is coming?" she asked quickly. Issei sighed and spoke up. "I'm sure you remember the confrontation at the church?" he asked. She nodded and started to wonder where this was going. "Well, it goes a little something like this. I was informed by Gabriel that a girl there. You saw her, the nun. She was going to have her sacred gear extracted by the fallen angels," he said. Seraphol's eyes widened as she tensed. "Azazel wouldn't do that. That could easily be seen as an act of war," she urged. Issei just shook his head. "Not Azazel. Kakabiel has gone rouge," he said softly. Her eyes widened for the umpteenth time that day. She was starting to see where this was going. "What was that girl's sacred gear?" she asked carefully. He sighed and looked at her. "Twilight healing, I'm sure you know of its power," he replied. She nodded numbly. "Now I'm sure you're wondering how all this fits together. Well, let me clear it up a bit," he said suddenly. She looked at him sharply. She was a little confused. "Every faction has a piece here. Asia was the angel's part. Now Kakabiel would be a little upset he didn't get her sacred gear, but sure enough he'd move forward with his plans. He most likely knows that the two sisters of the Devil Kings are here in this town. If he were to kill them, then that would be the biggest possible thing to spark a war. This town is essentially a powder keg, waiting for someone to light to fuse and blow it all hell. He explained. Her eyes widened in horror. He was right. This town was about to be the center of a war. That is if Kakabiel would get what he wanted. What are you going to do about it? She asked seriously. He sighed and spoke up. I'm going to do my best to avoid this shitstorm of a mess that will engulf this fucking town. That's why I'm training those two fallen angels, so they can be prepared and not get the floor wiped with them by Kakabiel. He said. Seraphil wondered what he meant. Surely he could take on Kakabiel easily, right? That's what she thought, however there was something she didn't know. Why train them? Can't you take care of Kakabiel easily? She asked confused. Issei chuckled and explained. That's exactly what those girls asked. The current Lucifer underestimated me. If he had known what I could do it would have turned out a lot different. My powers work in a lot of ways and they have their own applications. I'm not some insanely fucking powerful killing machine that can take on anyone unscathed. No, I have my own limits, and anyone with a good head on their shoulders could take me on and make me use effort. He explained dryly. She wondered what it would look like to see him actually trying. She had a sneaky smile as she knew that might actually come true. If everything went well, that other favor would be paid full. Okay then, that's all I needed to know. She said. Issei watched her cautiously and suspiciously as she got up and walked into her own magic circle. Once she was gone he let out a breath he was holding in. Kai looked to him and saw something was wrong. What's the matter? He asked carefully. He looked at him and explained. Before she left she had this expression on her face that made me think she knew something that we don't, and it involves me. He explained. Kai put his hand to his chin as he thought about it. If it does have to do with you, we'll face whatever comes our way like we always do. Kai said softly. Issei nodded and turned around to see the girls coming downstairs. They looked concerned like they just witnessed someone's death. What did she want? Kalwerner asked quickly. Issei sighed and explained. She wanted to know about Kakabiel's plans. I had to tell her. That Citri used a favor to get me to talk. He said. Rainer wondered what else was going to happen. Any ideas of what that other favor could be for? She asked. Issei shook his head. This day was just too much for him. I have no idea. If she's smart she won't make it entirely crazy and make me angry. He said quickly. They all watched as he quickly walked upstairs. He didn't want anyone now to bother him. He was starting to crack. He truly was a ticking time bomb. Both girls watched in confusion as he walked past them. I suggest you don't stay up too late. Tomorrow is your first day of school. Our training schedule is 3 times a week, a day in between to let you rest. He said as he passed them. They turned to Kai as they heard him sigh. He looked at the girls and started to explain. When Issei starts to get like this, it's better to leave him alone. You see his rage builds to the point where he needs to calm himself down quickly or he will snap at anyone, even me. He can be like a ticking time bomb ready to go off at any moment. The Leviathan coming here was something that even he had to restrain himself from getting angry at. I could see it in his eyes. Be warned, when you see his temper explode you don't want to get in his way. He said softly. They sat down next to him. Can we ask a few questions? There was some other stuff we wanted to know. Kalwerner asked. I nodded and listened as they started. You said he never knew his mother. How then is that the one thing he cares the most about? Rainer asked. I sighed and told them. Even if never met her, it's his mother. With the situation of how he was conceived, sure he never met his mother since she was condemned. However, it's a part of him, something he will never forget. He said softly. They both blinked and understood now. It was his mother and he would love her dearly. That was the end of story right there, and there was no changing that fact whatsoever. What are the signs of his rage starting to show? What triggers it? I want to know so that maybe I can try to calm him down, or we at least know to get out of the way before he does blow his top. Kalwerner asked softly. I chuckled and laughed a bit at her foolishness. She glared at him as he calmed himself down. I'm sorry to tell you, you won't be able to calm him down a single bit. No one can do that really. The best thing to do when he gets close to blowing his top is to stay away from him and don't bother him. Let him cool down on his own. The signs though are tough. Some you can see easily, some are more subtle. Firstly, watch out for hardened eyes and glares. You may see him clenching his fists a bit. He may get stiff or tense. It's all a matter of what he's feeling. If it's something that made him extremely mad, then you'll start to see outbursts of shouts. He may tell someone to shut the fuck up. You won't really know when it's coming, just that he is getting closer. When you feel the demonic energy though, that's a surefire sign that he is close to lashing out and wanting to destroy something. He explained. They widened their eyes as he finished. They wondered how long it was going to take for him to forget all restraints and finally lose his shit. If there was one thing they were sure of, it was that it was going to happen, and that whoever was the reason for it would be severely sorry for what would they unleashed on themselves. They knew it was time to get some rest and get ready for tomorrow, however they wondered what tomorrow would bring. They had no idea what would come to fruition though. With no more words to be said, they walked upstairs and went into their room and turned in for the night. Scene break morning. It was already morning and Issei was up early. He was sitting downstairs eating his breakfast and thinking about what this day would bring for him. He couldn't help but wonder what Sona would use her other favor for. Going away from those thoughts, he looked at the clock, 2 hours until they had to leave. Suddenly he heard footsteps behind him. He looked to see Rainer already awake. It seemed she had just gotten out of the shower and gotten ready. She looked at Issei warily. She was wondering if his temper had died down a bit. He looked at her dryly as she got some food and sat down next to him. "Gonna say this once, when we get there, don't attract any unwanted attention. Also, don't believe what anyone says about me," he said suddenly. She turned to him in confusion. "I get the part of not attracting attention, but why shouldn't I believe what people say about you?" she asked, confused. He chuckled dryly and started to explain. "I'm not a very well-liked person at that school. You see, I befriend 2 blatant perverts who have no problems with spreading rumors. I did it to blend in, so I wouldn't attract attention. However, that's not the case. Those 2 will most likely hit on you and peek if they get the chance. Like I said, just don't believe anyone's opinion of me," he explained. She giggled a bit as she heard him explain. She wondered what it would be like today. Soon all of them were ready and already heading towards the school. Issei knew this day was going to be a long one. No one could say otherwise. However, if he knew what was going to happen, he would skip immediately. As they walked through the gates and towards the building, it was obvious they were getting stares. All of them felt it. Issei knew they were being watched by the devils too. Rainer and Kalwerner knew it as well. He knew this was going to be a bad day when he got a lot of shocked looks. Once they finally arrived at the classroom, he sighed as he knew it was showtime. It seemed word spread around fast due to the fact as soon as they stepped into the classroom, the male students were glaring at Issei while drooling over the 2 girls. The teacher cleared his throat and spoke up. "Ah. You must be the new students, go ahead and introduce yourselves," he said aloud. Issei took his seat and just dozed off as they started. "I'm Kalwerner and this is Rainer. We're sisters," they said. They had to make up and lie. They watched as people started to raise their hands to ask questions. One girl was called on and it was Murayama. Issei saw this and growled. He knew what was coming. "We saw you walk in with Haidu. Has the pervert blackmailed you?" she asked quickly. Rainer giggled as Kalwerner shook her head. They were about to speak up, but someone interrupted them. "Damn you, Issei. What have you done to get these delicious babes to follow you around?" Motohama shouted aloud. Issei's eyes started to twitch. He knew this was gonna happen. Kalwerner shook her again as Rainer spoke up. "We live with Issei," she said. That was enough to send the whole classroom into a flurry of shouts and protests. The teacher had decided to calm everyone down and start the class with everyone. "That's enough questions, you 2 can take the seats next to Issei," he said aloud. They nodded and sat down in their respective seats. You could tell Issei wasn't too thrilled to be here. He just looked out the window. Before anyone knew it, lunch had rolled around and the 3 of them were in the cafeteria. Suddenly Issei felt a presence enter the room. It was a devil. He turned around to see Sona herself. He narrowed his eyes as she walked towards them. He figured this was about the last favor. "Look alive," he muttered to the girls. They looked around and widened their eyes when they saw her. They knew something was up now. "Issei Haidu, I'm calling in that last favor." Her eyes twinkled with amusement. He sighed and got up. "Very well, let's go." He shrugged. She looked at the 2 girls impassively for a moment. "You can bring your friends as well," she said quickly. He looked at them for a moment as they got up and followed behind them. Shortly they were walking towards the exit. Issei's eyes narrowed as he thought of where they were going. Sure enough, they walked right out and straight towards the orc room. Kalwerner and Rainer saw Issei tense and knew he was close. "Boy. What are we doing here?" he asked strongly. Sona looked at him for a second. "Just deal with it," she said softly. He twitched his eyebrow as he heard her. They eventually walked inside and was met with the same room before. The girls didn't see it before, so they were a little creeped out. Issei was beyond furious as he glared at the red-haired she-devil in the room. "You have 10 seconds to explain why I'm here before it will get ugly," he said loudly. The Kendo looked at him for a second and wondered where all this hate came from. It was like it was endless. Sona just rolled her eyes. Soon a magic circle appeared in the room and Issei instantly recognized the family. "Phoenix. Fuck me," he thought as he saw it. 3 people popped out of the magic circle. 2 women and 1 man. The man was obviously an egotistical brat, since the way he looked at everyone like they were inferior to him. When his eyes landed on Issei he smirked, then he almost choked when he saw the 2 fallen angels. "Ah. My lovely Rias, I'm here to finalize the details of our marriage," he said suddenly. Issei's eyes twitched as he started to put the pieces. He turned to Sona and whispered in a deathly cold tone. "You think this is funny? After this you're lucky to get out alive if you cross me again," he said softly. She shuddered as she felt the temperature drop, everyone else felt it too. They all looked to Issei as started to calm himself down. "Rias, who is this man?" the grey-haired girl asked. Issei looked over her, she was stoic and cold. Like a snake ready to uncoil and sink its fangs into its prey. He'd have to watch her closely. Rias looked at her and whispered something in her ear, the woman's eyes widened as she heard Rias. Issei smirked at the fear slowly showing on her face. You could tell she knew this boy was someone not to mess with. "Whoever he is just a peasant compared to me," the man said. The maid looked at him with wide eyes. "Riser, I think you should get back on topic here," she said quickly. He snorted, Issei needed to get something off his chest. "Who's the circus sideshow?" he said quizzically. The man turned to him with a furious glare. "You peasant have no idea who you're talking to. I'm Riser Phoenix, someone who is more powerful than you," he said with an arrogant tone. Issei blinked then laughed out loud. The girl next to him looked at him with hate in her eyes. "You should know your place. This is my brother we're talking about," she screeched. That only made Issei laugh even more, then he stopped and narrowed his eyes. "Quit acting foolish, brats, you have no idea what I can do to you. I know all about the Phoenix's power. You're not immortal at all, you just have insane regeneration capabilities. Quit while you're ahead now," he said quickly. Riser just glared at him. "You want to test that strength of yours against mine?" he snickered. Issei just sighed and looked at him dryly. "Very well, name the time and place. It will be your grave though, I'm not going to give you the easy route just because you're a pompous brat," Issei said quickly. Riser was furious, it was time to show this kid what a Phoenix could do. The maid just shook her head at his stupidity, he had no idea what was about to come to him. Before anyone could say anything, Issei turned his back to them and walked out. However, he stopped in front of the door, the room started to get very cold. "I've warned you, don't expect me to go back on my word. You will not be able to win this," he said softly. Riser just snickered as he left the room, before anyone knew it everyone was back at lunch for the day. Issei however wasn't in the cafeteria, he found himself atop the school roof, as he recounted the day's details in his mind, he was beyond furious. The Citri had purposefully dragged him in there and used his hate against devils like Riser against him, she'd known Issei would want to kill Riser, and they would get into a fight, and Issei wouldn't hold back. Furious was an understatement. Livid didn't even fit it. He was about to forget about the school day and teleport somewhere to blow off some steam, however something stopped him. He felt a presence coming up to the roof. He watched subtly as Akeno Himejima came up, it seemed she knew he would be here. "Can I talk to you?" she asked softly. Issei's eyes widened as he heard her tone, it was soft and almost innocent and caring. What did she want though? That's what he wanted to know. Badly. Issei stared impassively at the girl who stood before him, a part of him wanted to just disappear and leave the god-forsaken place and blow some shit up. However, another part wondered why she was here and what she had to say. He finally relented and shrugged his shoulders, Akeno instantly took that as a good sign and walked next to him. They both leaned on the railing of the school. "So what did you want?" Issei asked dryly. If she didn't have anything to say, she was wasting his time then and hers. "I wanted to know why you have so much hate in you, I'd never think I seen so much fury and anger in someone's eyes, that was until I met you," she said suddenly. Issei chuckled dryly. "Why do I so much hate in my heart? Look at the world around you, there are liars, deceivers, and people who don't give a single shit about anyone but themselves. Everyone has their own faults. However, most don't own up and admit their own faults. This world is full of them, and none of them have the balls to own up and try to change their mistakes. I'm sick of it all, this world has taken too much from me," he said. Akeno's eyes widened as she heard him, his tone sounded so bitter, devoid of any emotion. A part of her wondered what it would be like if all that hate was gone, and he could truly feel something else besides bitterness and hate. She also vowed that she would see it come true, however long it took. She would break through his walls slowly and show him a world besides what he believed. "How can you say that when there's a different stories that can be told by everyone else?" she asked quickly. He chuckled and spoke, once again in a dry tone. "Sure, there's no doubt about that, but those are other people's lives and their own stories, my life is a story of loneliness, hate, grief and pain. It's ironic, you say there's more to the world than what I feel, however you haven't experienced what I have," he said amused. She closed her eyes as she let his words sink in. You're right when you say I haven't experienced what you have, but I have experienced those emotions too. I know what grief, pain, hate and loneliness is like. I know what it's like to suffer for something you have no control over. She said softly. Tears were threatening to fall with her remembering her past. Issei noticed this and wondered where this was going. He wasn't that versed in this particular girl's history. He knew she was part fallen, and that had to do something with it. What you say might be true, but that is your life and not mine. You've only experienced a short period of your life. I've experienced over 300 years. He retorted. She frowned as she heard him. It was time to take a different approach to get him to open up. Time to tell him her story. Yet you say that, but pain is pain. I know what it's like to suffer greatly. She said softly. He chuckled and looked at her. Oh? How so? He asked amused. She took a deep breath and began to tell her story. My father was a high-ranking fallen angel in the Grigori. He was injured when my mother took him in and healed his wounds. They soon fell in love afterwards. By the time I was 10 years old, I witnessed my own mother's death. I was shortly kicked out of my own clan afterwards for me having fallen blood in my veins. I roamed Japan alone trying to live with barely any money or food. Eventually my own clan tried to kill me, but I was saved by Rias. I know what it's like to suffer. She explained sadly. He blinked as he saw her tears. They weren't faked either. He sighed as he knew sometimes his words were harsh and they didn't give any signs of sorrow. He knew he could be insensitive or thoughtless. However, that was how he was. However, he couldn't deny there was something about this girl that intrigued him. It made him falter before. He knew that his mask had cracked a few times and this girl had seen through it. He sighed and leaned over the railing a bit more and he started to speak in a soft tone. Listen, I know that what I say may be harsh or cruel. In fact, that's what most people interpret it as. However, they fail to see the message my words give. I won't deny it either that pain is pain and there is nothing that can erase it. However, it is what makes us who we are. You say you have felt pain. Yes, that is true, but what have you learned from it? Pain is something to take in and learn from the mistakes that caused it. In the end, we are what we want to be. It is that same fact that we aren't who others want us to be. You are you and I am I. You're not Rias Gremori's queen, you're a Keno Himejima, like I'm not just the son of Lucifer. I'm Issei Haidu, and I'm proud of it. I'm able to look further beyond and see what my future is and how I can adapt to it. That is what you need to figure out. Where do you stand as a Keno Himejima and not a piece of a chess game? He said softly. Little did he know that those words had struck a chord within her heart and it was already taking an effect on her. Her tears quickly flooded as she hugged him suddenly. He was instantly surprised when he felt her arms wrap around him. He quickly shook of a strange feeling he never really felt before. He dare say he liked it, he didn't know where it came from either. Her grip was like iron too, he could force his way out, but he wasn't going to hurt her on accident. So he kept his face stoic and calm and waited for her to let go. Once she did, the tears were dry. However, his shirt wasn't. Thank you, she whispered. As he turned around, she was already walking away. He didn't move from his spot at all, his mind was devoid of any thoughts. Slowly, but surely the mask was coming down and his walls were going to crumble along with it. He finally looked down to see his shirt soaked from her tears. He was right, today was a long day. After all, people started to notice a change in his behavior after he came down from the roof. He seemed lost in thought to other people. Even Kalwerner and Rainer noticed it and instantly wondered what was wrong. Before anyone knew it, the school day had come to an end and Issei and the girls were walking home. However, there was a slight problem. Not a word was spoken from Issei, he still seemed deep in thought. It was bugging Kalwerner to no end, she needed to know what was going on with him. Issei, what wrong? She asked. It shook Issei out of his stupor and he looked at her. He wasn't going to tell them what happened, so he was going to bluff. Nothing really, just that Phoenix. I'm gonna need to come up with a plan. He lied. It was a half lie, he knew the Phoenix wasn't going to be a pushover. There was that obstacle of his regeneration, he knew that he could easily decimate the fried chicken, however if he used his true power on the fool, it would be a stupid thing for him to do. The reason being that the duel would be most likely watched by every devil in the underworld. That meant if he gave out his secret to the whole populace, it would be bad. He was sure there was only the faction leaders who knew about his true identity. Before anyone knew it, they had already arrived at the house. Issei didn't even pay attention to anybody as he walked right up to his room. There was too much on his mind and he was confused like a bitch. I instantly noticed it and turned to the girls. What happened to him? He asked quickly. They shrugged and spoke up. He was manipulated into getting into a fight with Riser Phoenix. I think that's part of it. However, there's something he is hiding. Rainer replied. Eyes widened as he heard the name Phoenix. Tell me, this Riser Phoenix, how did he act in front of Issei? First impressions on him are crucial to how he will fight someone. he said suddenly. Alwerner chuckled and answered him. He was arrogant, believing him to be atop everyone else. A typical pompous brat who had everything handed to him on a silver platter. She answered. I sighed and knew what was going to happen when they fought. Something else caught his attention. You say he is hiding something? What do you mean? He asked quizzically. They both looked at him for a second. Alwerner was the one to speak up. After the meeting with the Phoenix, he disappeared for the rest of the lunch period. When the next class came around, we noticed a change in his behavior. It was like he was confused and deep in thought about something, maybe conflicted is a better word than confused. She explained. That made Kai widen his eyes instantly. Issei was never usually conflicted. He was headstrong and stubborn, so if he was conflicted about something, it was extremely serious to him. Tell me what he was doing, how he was acting. Did he seem lost or out of place? He said seriously. Alwerner and Rainer shook their heads. Rainer was the one to answer this time. Not that much, he seemed a little out of place. However, I think it was more of a mental feeling. He just wasn't himself. Anyone could tell if they looked at him. He barely paid anyone attention and just stared into space. I could see in his eyes though that he was thinking deeply though. She answered. Kai put his hand to his chin as he thought about it for a good bit. Alas, he couldn't come up with a reason though. He'd just have to wait for Issei to come out with it on his own, that is if he would. If it was something that made him conflicted, then he would most likely keep it to himself until he resolved it on his own. They'd just have to wait and see what happens. Meanwhile upstairs, Issei was very conflicted about a certain topic. It kept coming back to him, like video on replay. A hug. He was never one for any physical or emotional contact with someone else. It was only usually Kai that hugged him when he was worried, but this was a completely different story. She did it on purpose, so that meant one thing. She wanted to, and she didn't regret it at all. Her words to him at the end concreted that fact in his mind. However, that wasn't what made him conflicted. No, it was the fact a part of him liked it and wanted to feel it again. He quickly shoved those thoughts deep down, hoping them to never rise to the surface again. However, he knew it was futile, it just kept coming back to him. Exactly like a video on replay. He was able to change his train of thought to the fight between him and the Phoenix. He knew the fight wouldn't be easy at all. No, he wasn't going to underestimate the Phoenix, added with their insane regenerative abilities, and whatever combat and physical training the bird underwent, it may just make him be able to stand up to him for a good bit. He knew the Phoenix might give him an actual fight. Quickly deciding to go to sleep early, he got ready for bed almost instantly and hopped in. As he finally fell asleep, he dreamed of a certain Yamato Nadeshiko, and boy did he not expect it at all. Scene break morning. Issei awoke quickly in the morning after and instantly walked downstairs to get some breakfast. It was Saturday, so he had some time off from school. However, he couldn't keep the image of him getting hugged by her. It wasn't haunting him or something like that. No, it was just something he didn't understand. That and the dream he had, oh and boy was it a shocker. He could remember parts of it and it wasn't what he expected. The first part of the dream he remembered was her face. It was looking down at him with a smile. There was no tears in her eyes as she smiled down at him. It was this part that made him confused. The second part made him shocked in disbelief. He remembered a bedroom door opened, and both of them were lying in each other's arms. Unknowingly Kai was awake and came into the kitchen to see Issei like this for himself. He frowned. Now he knew something was wrong. Okay Issei, spill it. What is bothering you? He asked. Issei looked at him surprised. He should have known Kai would be able to ready him easily. He sighed. He didn't want to tell him the whole truth. Something happened yesterday that I can't get out of my head. He said, part of the truth. Kai's eyebrow raised in confusion. He wanted to know even more. What happened? He asked. Unbeknownst to each of them, both the girls were awake and currently listening in. They wanted to know too. Issei was silent. If he told the truth, Kai would be understanding and would give him advice. However, he knew he would take any chance to tease him as well. Someone did something that I can't forget. Every time I try, it comes back to me every time. He said vaguely. Kai looked shocked, then a grin appeared on his face. He knew Issei was going to be vague, however Kai knew what his words meant. He knew whoever this was, they were making progress with him. It was only a matter of time before all his walls came down. Well, if I know you Issei, and that's pretty well. Figure out what you're feeling and then go from there. Figure out what you want truly. He said quickly. Issei blinked as he heard Kai. That was the man himself. He always said something that would help. Figures he would be able to find it out easily. With a knowing grin on his face, Issei assumed he was able to put the pieces together. He might not know who it was, but he knew the effect it had on him. The okay, whatever. Issei muttered. Suddenly everyone tensed as they felt magic energy. It was heading for them. The girls had just walked downstairs when they felt it. Kai instantly was on guard. Issei stared at the magic circle that appeared in the living room. It was Gremory. He cursed as two people stepped out. It was the maid from the other day and Surzich's. "We're here to discuss the duel between Riser Phoenix," Surzicha said quickly. Issei grunted and listened as they continued. Everyone was tense, they knew the situation was now a ticking time bomb. "How many people know of my existence?" Issei suddenly asked. Surzichas looked at him for a second. "Only the faction's leaders," he said simply. Issei nodded and listened as he continued. "The duel will take place tomorrow, the rules are simple. Anything you have in your arsenal can be used, the one who surrenders first loses," he explained. Issei nodded, that was something good on his part. He didn't have any restrictions on what he could use. "Just know, if you let out a bunch of power, your secret may not be able to stay one," Surzicha said quickly. Issei just grunted and sighed as they both left again in the magic circle. Issei growled and got up and walked outside, he needed some fresh air to clear his head. The girls back inside the house looked at Kai for a moment before speaking up. "We heard your conversation with Issei before they arrived, what do you think is going on with Issei?" Kaloriner asked. I smiled and motioned for them to sit down. When Issei is conflicted, it's usually something that deals with a number of things. Firstly, he didn't expect it at all, and it keeps reminding him. Second, it brings up emotion he usually doesn't feel. This is where you can start to put things together. "I think someone is starting to break down his walls and his facade," he said simply. They looked surprised. "Are you sure? This is Issei we're talking about, it doesn't really seem like he would let someone in that easily. Also, what's this about his facade and walls?" Rainer asked quizzically. I chuckled and began to explain. "Well, I think someone did something unexpected and that made them be able to get in close, maybe it was some sort of affection. Issei hasn't really felt that sort of feeling from a girl that isn't related to him. About his facade, Issei hides his true self behind walls and wears a mask to hide the pain he has felt. The hate and bitterness is part of it, you could say the demonic side of him is the facade and the angel side is what is underneath. When it all comes down, what's left over is someone who is deeply hurt," he said softly. They were both shocked, they never thought they'd see the real Issei. Something was telling them it was going to happen soon. Before anyone knew it, the next day had arrived and it was time for the duel to begin. In the underworld stood two figures that wanted to rip each other apart and one of them was going to. With hardened glare, Issei looked at his opponent. He was ready. That's it guys. Thanks for watching and supporting us. See you in the next part.